Hi guys, welcome back to another exciting video, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. A wince came across your face as you headed to the dorm rooms after summer break, pulling your loud suitcase that rattled hard against the ground, making you completely give up on being sneaky. At least no one else seemed to be here just yet. So, over the last few weeks of summer, your 18th birthday had come, along with something else: your status. People with quirks developed their status at the very start of adulthood instead of teenagers, and yours was exactly what you feared: Omega. It wouldn't have been so bad to be an Omega normally, but your quirk in particular made it especially rough, and everyone was sure you'd be an Alpha because of it. Wolf was your quirk. The ability to transform into either a large full wolf or only partly, like stages of a werewolf. Your already heightened senses such as reaction time, smell, sight, and hearing became even more extreme in your transformed states, which was great normally, but it would make any Alpha influence, on purpose or not, much higher too. There was a few who had come into their status right before summer and some who would develop right after, and you feared who would now be Alpha. Before the summer, Todoroki, Shoji, and Takoyami had shown themselves as Alphas, with Minta and Midoriya showing as Betas. That had given you some relief, as the Alphas so far were naturally calm and relaxed, and that damn perv wouldn't be able to affect your instinct. There was still a lot of students yet to come into their status that made you uneasy, though you'd need to take a double dose of suppressants every day from now on and pray there were more Betas to come, maybe even another Omega. You pushed open your dorm room and yanked your case inside so you could quickly close the door behind you, knowing a simple door wouldn't be enough to muffle any sense. But at least it was a physical barrier. Before unpacking, you ripped open your pills and shoved one to the back of your mouth to swallow it, and dug out the thin C-colored collar from your bag that would be able to help suppress your scent glands. With those safety measures in place, you could breathe a sigh of relief and unpack. A few hours later, anxiety flooded through you as you heard more people arrive. You heard them chat happily to each other as they unpacked and formed groups downstairs in the common area, but you simply couldn't bring yourself to face them, not yet. You didn't trust your pheromone blockers, nor your quirk. You'd very much be an outlier with these types of suppressants and hadn't taken them for a proper test drive yet. In fact, you'd pretty much hidden yourself indoors away from any contact since you felt the change, fearing an encounter with an Alpha would kick off your first heat. Why did I come back here? You groaned quietly, curling into a ball on your side with your head racing. How on earth could you be a hero now? Maybe the support class could help you, but that would mean putting yourself on the firing line of testing their theories out. Damn, what could you do? Muffled voices downstairs of laughter paused your thoughts, as well as a tasty smell. Your yellow eyes widened as your stomach grumbled loudly, making you jump. With a pathetic whine, you pulled out a bag of rice crackers from your suitcase and began to snack on them, planning to wait till everyone had at least gone to sleep before you would brave going to the kitchen. Hey, is why? And here yet. Your ears picked up your name being spoken in the hallway, and you let your ears transform slightly into small pointed wolf ears, just enough to increase your sense of hearing. I don't know, I can faintly smell her, though maybe she's napping. Ashido's voice: Mina can smell me. She must have come into her status then. Can she smell my Omega? You prayed they'd run with the assumption you were sound asleep and leave you be, but you could smell them linger outside your door. Knock knock. FRK. YN. You there? You held off the low whine that crawled up your throat and cursed yourself for panicking so hard. It was just Mina and Ochako. Why, you just really tired is all you called out awkwardly, and cursed yourself again for how meek you sounded. Are you okay? You sound strange, Mina grumbled, her shadow very present at the door, and you could hear her faint sniff of the air. Oh my god, you heard a strange tone in Mina's voice as your door handle turned and was pushed open. Mina. YN. What is that smell? You reek of scent blocker, and not a nice one. She took 3 large steps over to you, towering over you as you cowered wide-eyed on the bed. She could smell the blocker. Ugh, it was a cheap one, but you liked to cover yourself in it, and buying an expensive one seemed dumb. Ochako stared between the two of you, her beta status confused, and you motioned for her to come in and close the door. You could at least make this confession private. Why, and are you an Omega? Ochako finished Mina's question, and you nodded slowly, seeing both their eyes go wide. Do you know how rare that is? When did you find out? I know it's rare. Usually those with quirks are 70% likely to become an Alpha, less than 3% become an Omega and get kicked out of their hero courses. I found out last month. Mina exhaled deeply, putting her hands on her hips with a concerned expression plastered across her face. She never really was the type to be subtle. That's just rumor. With today's medical advances, there's no reason for you to leave the hero course. You've done so much already. She gently sat down in the bed next to you and wrapped an arm around your shoulder, her Alpha scent comforting and holding little other effect over you. Normally Omega bodies are weaker before they even know their status, right? If you've made it this far, then it's just pheromones you need to worry about, right? Ochako asked, sitting the other side of you, reaching into your lap to hold one of your hands in hers. You shrugged with a sigh, leaning into the beta to pull yourself away from the Alpha scent drifting from Mina. I'm not worried about my physical strength, I'm strong. It's my biggest trait as a hero. But you looked pointedly at Mina and gave a pathetic pout. You're sent alone, you're not even a male or trying to influence me, and all I want to do is curl up in that aroma and let you take care of me. You saw the guilty wince in Mina's face while a faint embarrassed blush crossed yours. Ugh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it like that. Mina quickly shushed you and smiled apologetically while shifting back to give you space from her aura. It's okay. I'm glad you told me. Maybe we can go shopping for some nice blockers for both of us this week to make it easier to hang around each other. A smile lifted your mouth and Ochako gave you the hug Mina was holding back from giving you. What would I do without you guys? Well, for one, you'd reek of terrible blocker, Mina shouted before you three began to burst into giggles. We'll look out for you. You don't have to worry about a thing, Ochako said while squeezing your shoulders gently, and you wrapped your arms around her to thank her for her kind words. Mina smiled, keeping her distance, but you knew she'd be there for you. You had an alpha on your side who wouldn't manipulate you at the very least. You could do this. Now let's get you downstairs and get some food in you. I keep hearing your stomach complaining. You couldn't do this. You know I can't. The whine in your voice made you groan internally at how pathetic you sounded. You were on the hero course. Nothing had scared you before. But now you were an Omega. Things were all so different. Yes, you can seriously. You just smell like a strange perfume I wouldn't have guessed by scent alone. Just keep your head up high and you won't give anything away, Mina grinned, giving you a thumbs up before standing and motioning Ochako to drag you to your feet. Are you sure? It's not obvious I'm wearing blockers though, right? Mina's face twisted a little as she thought, and you sighed. It's obvious. Well, you could pretend you're just covering an alpha scent. Everyone expected you to be an alpha from your quirk alone, so. An alpha. Pretend to be an alpha. That's a bad idea, you simply replied, looking down at your fluffy socks wrapped around your feet. Since you had become an Omega, you had discovered that you got cold ridiculously fast, yet another reason to hate your status and a dumb need to buy as much warm clothing as possible, even though it was still warm weather outside. You heard Mina huff and your eyes lifted to her face that was pouted and deep in thought. Well, you can't hide here forever. The more you leave yourself hungry, the more your pheromones are going to overpower those blockers. You'll end up with every alpha in a 10-mile radius wanting to bring food to this room. Bite the bullet and don't answer any questions you don't want to. Okay. You have an alpha and an Ochako on your side. Mina's words slowly sunk in, and you heaved a sigh before laughing at Ochako's determined buousness face. You're right, okay. Let's go before I change my mind. It was the usual chaos in Dorm 3A as everyone spoke about their summer break. Some boasted about their alpha status to other bored-looking students who were either alphas or betas themselves and didn't care at all, while the rest helped with food preparation and table setting. It was a nice chaos, the kind that felt like family, whether you loved them or not. So Baku bro, what did you get up to over the break? More internships, Kirishima asked as he flopped into the sofa seat beside the bored ash blonde who had been ejected from kitchen duties due to his unhelpfulness. He glanced over to his spiky red-haired friend for a moment before shrugging. Yeah, with Endeavor's agency again. Kiri grinned, urging the usual limitless energy from the suddenly quiet Katsuki. When he simply nodded, Kiri knew for sure that something was wrong. And it was true. Over the summer, Katsuki had developed his alpha status and been proud of it. He had gloated and swaggered and been his usual on the best self. But over the last few days, something strange had knocked him, and he couldn't put his finger on what. He was more irritable than usual, much more tired, and way more antisocial than usual too. He didn't even want to yell at anyone. No, all Katsuki wanted to do was go on long isolated walks or train, and it bugged him. The red-haired alpha beside him could read all of this strange behavior from the few seconds he had interacted with him. And instead of pushing, Kirishima simply sat quietly with him in concern while Katsuki barely seemed to notice. His mind was floating, not focusing on anything in particular: the smell of cooking food, the idle chatter of a few betas, the bragging of Kaminari, who had somehow gotten lucky enough to be an alpha. But something caught his attention. In fact, it seemed to catch the attention of several of the male alphas in the room before they shrugged it off. But it held Katsuki's normally deflated attention and piqued his interest, making him almost feel excited for the first time in weeks. His nose lifted slightly as he inhaled slowly and deeply, making Kiri give him a confused look before the red-haired alpha took his own sniff of the air curiously. To Kirishima, all he could smell was the people in the room, the food, and a cheap perfume from the staircase. But to Katsuki, there was something delicious wrapped deep within that false scent of poorly crafted chemicals, a sweet smell, a warm and comforting smell, a scent that made his throat tighten just from having it flow into his lungs. The word Omega almost came from his lips like instinct. But he clenched his teeth, saliva building rapidly in his mouth while his pulse raced. His vermilion eyes focused intensely on the top of the stairs where you slowly came into view, flanked by Mina and Ochako. He caught sight instantly of the little flesh-colored collar and knew you were hiding something from the fear in your eyes. You and Omega it had to be. The scent blocker was much more obvious to his nose now as he subtly took long inhales, mapping out everything about you on instinct. You were trying to hide yourself, it seemed, coated from head to toe in a horrible smell and wearing a suppressor collar. Not to mention the pill you had taken that he could practically taste. No, the 2 pills. You were really trying to hide. Katsuki took a glance at the other alphas in the room who were blissfully unaware of the delicious-smelling omega coming down the last few steps and smirked, excitement filling him. He was the greatest hero. Of course, only he wouldn't be fooled by such cheap masking tricks. His eyes followed you as you walked over to a few betas, including that damn Deku, and greeted them with a cautious smile, obviously uncomfortable. Everything about you gave it away to him, and his alpha instincts were pulling him to stand up and cross the room to you to claim you right there. No one else was aware. He could snag an omega for himself and be even greater, but his conscience was kicking in, as well as the curious stare of Kirishima, who had noticed his sudden fixation on you. Katsuki wasn't the type of guy to want a relationship, let alone a mating bond. He could tell the difference of his own needs and wants versus those of his internal alpha. Even though the thought of someone else in the class taking you for themselves irked his alpha, Katsuki tried his best to convince himself that he didn't need you. He didn't need to claim you and breed the fuck out of you just because your scent was that of an omega. You were so desperate in your attempts to hide your status. Maybe no one would know and you'd never be claimed. It was a thought that made him feel hollow, but soothed the strange sudden need for now. He didn't want you, but he didn't want anyone else to have you. The idea of your heat flashed in his head for a moment, and his teeth clenched again at the thought of how useless your medications would be to him then, considering you were using every trick in the Omega book to stay inconspicuous. FRK. He was almost starting to get hard from the thought of it. Back you go. Kirishima's cautious voice snapped his attention away from you, and he met the red eyes of his friend, clearing his mind of the mental image of you in a heat daze. What? He huffed in his usual gruff tone, seeming to slowly come back to his normal attitude and quell his budding arousal. Kirishima simply smiled and shrugged his shoulders, seeing the fire in his friend's eyes once again. Nothing, come on, they're calling us to go eat. It wasn't so bad. You'd managed to get downstairs and greet your friends before being ushered to the dinner table, and nothing bad had happened. Of course, it was overflowing with alpha scent, which helped to soothe you strangely enough, but it unnerved you too at how much of it surrounded you. All it would take is a slight argument between 2 alphas and you would start reacting, or so you'd been warned. But your blockers were working just fine for the moment, and you had to trust Mina and Ochako, who were currently sat either side of you, chatting away to their respective friend groups, to keep you safe. You felt a little left out, but your focus on eating as much as you could helped to ignore the gnawing feeling of loneliness. How could you possibly be feeling lonely surrounded by your classmates? You glanced up to take an unnoticed look across the table, seeing the students either talking or eating happily, energized from their summer or flaunting their alpha status. So many had become alphas, you noted, feeling your throat go dry and shrinking back into your seat a little. Your eyes drifted across the table from one end to the other as you reached for your glass. Your fingers quickly stopped dead around it as you accidentally locked with a pair of dark red eyes that were seeming to watch your every movement. Your own eyes went wide as a deer in headlights as the eyes of Katsuki Bakugo raked up from the tips of your fingers to your face, with an irritated yet curious expression. FRK, was there something on my face? Was my collar showing? No, you could feel it safely tucked under your shirt. Could he smell the blockers? Why was he still staring? He looked so angry, feeling incredibly awkward. You pulled the glass towards you and looked away to take a big gulp, feeling the water do nothing for the dryness of your throat. When you put the glass back down, you chanced to peek back over the ash blonde who had finally turned his attention away from you, and you exhaled. What the fuck was that? The last 2 years of knowing Bakugo had given you a very short impression. He was loud, angry and competitive, and one of the most likely to become an alpha. But that was it. You'd never really spoken outside of any team activities, nor hung around him much in the dorm common area. If he was taking any interest in you now, you feared what was going on inside his head. Was he even an alpha? Could he tell what you were? Hesitantly, you took a small sniff of the air in Katsuki's direction and felt your veins constrict, your pulse hammered, and your legs squeezed together. FRK, if anyone was to be looking at your eyes, they'd have seen the wild way they diluted it, taking in the most delicious smell imaginable that you couldn't believe was coming from that explosive brat. His scent had everything: warmth, spice, comfort, strength, and a bittersweet note along with that caramel hint his natural scent always had, as well as an undertone that made your lower stomach flutter and spread a heat between your thighs. As your hand clenched under the table out of view, you knew you'd made a mistake in being curious. You could feel the way your body was already reacting, releasing pheromones that you hoped the scent blockers would be able to mask. Your eyes screwed up tight to hide the way they were turning glossy as you felt Mina's knee bump yours, not quite managing to snap you out of your instinctive arousal. Hey, you okay? She whispered, and you nodded, turning in your seat to hide your face so you could open your eyes to aim for the stairs, hoping your legs could hold you up. I'm just not feeling well. I'm gonna go to bed, you rushed, standing up casually as to not draw attention to yourself. Well, okay. "Good night," Mina said softly, giving you a concerned look that you shrugged off with a smile and a good night in return before slipping off upstairs to put some distance between you and that mind-shattering scent. You had barely made it up the stairs before your knees wobbled out from beneath you and you had to grab the banister tight to stay standing. "You'll get used to it. You'll get used to it," you chanted softly to yourself as you managed to get your legs to move again, taking yourself away to your room to hide once again, tempted to bathe in more blocker after sorting yourself out to the memory of that scent. A few days had passed since that night and since Mina had drugged you to the mall for appropriate-smelling blockers, and now you were feeling better about starting classes again. Thankfully, you hadn't bumped into Bakugo yet, nor been close enough to catch his scent. You were painfully aware that you were trying your hardest to keep a good distance from him when you could. You sat near the back of the room, leg jittering in an unusual habit of fidgeting while riding an irritating gyro beside you. "You're wiggling the table," she muttered as Midnight monologued history to the quiet class who were all taking notes. Her words hit you a good few seconds after they left her and you made a no noise and stopped, trying to keep your legs still. "Sorry," you whispered back and she gave you a small thumbs up with a friendly smile without looking up at you, simply glad not to be writing shaky notes anymore. It felt impossible to sit still today. The first few classes of the day had you feeling buzzed for some reason, and you were fighting through history to get to hero training to burn off some of this strange energy. Glancing at the clock, you noticed you only had another few minutes and tried to stay focused on your note-taking. You wouldn't be failing any classes this year. You had sworn it to yourself. If only this damn inability to sit still would go away. You decided to fiddle with the flesh-colored collar wrapped tight around the base of your neck instead, keeping both your hands busy, and wondered how often you would need to replace it. It had been clipped on for 3 solid days and seemed to be working perfectly fine. But you threw away the packaging that had all the usage info on it. You didn't know how long they generally lasted for either. A sudden wave of unease washed over you along with the feeling of eyes watching you from out of nowhere, and your body froze. You glanced up, looking around without turning your head to not draw attention, but just saw everyone writing notes with their heads down. "Must have been my imagination." RIIINNNGGG. There was the almost instant shuffling and excited chatter of students as the bell rang loudly across the class and Midnight cracked her whip loudly before dismissing you all to hero training with a smirk. Hero training, your favorite lesson, as you could really let loose and practice your transformation in mid-battle. You let the thoughts of your collar expiry date go out of your head as you packed your supplies up and jogged to catch up with Mina, who was waiting at the door for you, cautious to let Bakugo exit long before you did. "Come on, girl, let's get our quirk on," she squealed, power walking beside you to grab your training clothes and head to the lockers, the whole time feeling that lingering unease of eyes on you right up until you closed the changing room door behind you. You slid into your training clothes and twisted your hair up into a high ponytail, knowing it would likely fall straight out if you did a full transformation anyway. As you turned around, you saw Mina stiffen a little and look at you. "What?" Your eyes went wide as you looked down at yourself, trying to see if anything was wrong with your clothes. As your hands felt down your shirt and back up, you felt your collar and noticed the clasp had come undone. "Oh." You quickly snapped the latch closed and looked away with a blush. "Damn thing. I need a more secure one," you muttered as Mina's dilated eyes went back to normal and she chuckled. "It's okay. I was just worried about you for a second there. All I could smell was you know." She gestured at you before glancing around, seeing that Momo had become a little unsettled and confused, sniffing the air curiously. You raised your brow, noting that there was a second female alpha in your class before shrugging. It wasn't the same kind of effect on same-sex that it had on the guys. Female alphas had much more control over their base instinct and were very, very unlikely to be spurred into a breeding frenzy like the males would. It still made them feel something, though Mina had described it as a very alluring scent that made her want to bury her face in and protect. It wasn't a bad thing for her, but it still made her feel too impulsive around you when your scent wasn't being blocked. "It's okay though. It just surprised me," she whispered with a soft grin, and you smiled back. "At least it happened in here." You laughed, glad it hadn't happened mid-class surrounded by male alphas. Over in the guys' changing room, the usual banter was taking place, the energy high to be doing some physical training, when a sweet mouth-watering scent wafted briefly throughout the room before vanishing. Every alpha in the room lifted their noses on instinct, just missing the source of the delicious scent and leaving them on edge. As the scent hit Bakugo, his eyes immediately went to the other raised heads in the room, an urge to growl at them threatening to rip from his throat, but he held it back as the scent disappeared. "Was that you?" He despised how his mouth watered from that second of unfiltered omega scent and roughly finished getting changed, much to Kirishima's confusion, who called out to him with no reply. Bakugo was the first one outside, waiting for training to begin with crossed arms, taking deep breaths to get rid of the lingering memory of your smell. Damn Omega Beach. While grumbling to himself, he noticed that Class B were heading his way, stopping and standing to one side a few meters away with their teacher and their gym kits. "What the hell? Hello, we're here to show you Class A assholes up." Monoma. Bakugo ground his teeth. The smell of the PPY Class B alpha gagging him, as well as the presence of a few other alphas in the other class. Alone and angry, Bakugo's own alpha hormones came off him in waves as a threatening message to Class B, especially Monoma, who grinned slimily at him and sauntered forward a few steps. Down boy, this doesn't have to turn ugly, the quirk copier smirked, watching with glee as Bakugo's hands clenched hard enough to turn his knuckles white. But a relaxing scent hit him faintly and his attention was drawn rapidly away from Monoma, unsurprisingly leading his gaze to you as you walked out of the changing rooms, laughing with Ochako. He wasn't dumb, he had noticed you were acting strange around him. Keeping as much distance between you as possible, he could smell the way you reacted on that first night back at the dorms and almost jumped across the table to quell your growing scent of arousal. He was thankful you left when you did, and even more grateful that you were actively keeping away and not tempting him. But seeing you and smelling you from afar still did something to him. His BLD pressure dropped considerably for a moment before he noticed Monoma take an inhale, and his death glare was suddenly back on the copycat, who smiled innocently, not seeming to be looking your way at all. Maybe he couldn't smell you were faint. Either way, he moved to block any view of you, sensing Kirishima and Kaminari coming over to flank him and possibly drag him away from the impending fight as he growled lowly. You're very quiet today. Not feeling at the top of your game. What a shame, we'll just crush you much more easily. Lay off. Stop being a brat, Kendo groaned, stomping over to grab Monoma by the shirt and drag him away after seeing the anger flaring from the three class of boys. Bakugo's brow raised as he caught a whiff of the Class B big sister's alpha hormones, a little surprised. His attention on her didn't last long, however. The closer you got, the more his mind wandered straight back to you until you were standing a few meters away with the rest of Class A, seemingly excited to begin training. He couldn't help but watch as you knelt down to tighten your shoelace, the angle letting him see the little flesh-colored collar once again, and a scoff left his mouth. You may as well have left it off for all the good it was currently doing you. He could smell you a lot more clearly than the other night, and with his alpha sight he noticed it was looking a little worse for wear. Had you ever taken it off? Mr. Sekijiro shouted a few things, and his students all lined up just before Aizawa came into view, boldly instructing Class A to do the same. You gave a confused look at Ochako as you realized Class B were meant to be here too, and she simply shrugged. Guess it's another class-to-class training day. Alright class, settle down, this is an observation day. You are all to take notes on each fight, and by having Class B here you will be able to have fresh eyes to call out your combat mistakes. Got it? I'll announce the pairs for sparring. You are to use your full power as always. I'll step in if it gets out of hand. Observations. Full power. The new wave of anxiety that flowed through you caused your fidgeting to kick into gear again, making you bounce a little on the spot, shifting from one foot to the other. The excitement of burning off some energy and having a fun spar was diminishing by the second, and a feeling of Nasu was hitting you hard. But to Aizawa and the rest of the class, you simply looked eager to get started. Why, and Todoroki, you two can start this off. What? Your eyes snapped to Aizawa, who was already walking away to get into place to watch the fight with a what the actual fuck expression plastered across your face. Todoroki, was he serious? You were going to be a giant ice cube in seconds. Your feet reluctantly carried you to the brawl space on the opposite end that Todoroki had walked to once the initial shock wore off, and you took a few relaxing deep breaths. Shoto's eyes seemed bored, as if he knew this fight wouldn't last more than a second and was a waste of his time, yet there was something else in them. You barely had time to gulp before Aizawa told you to begin. Almost instantly a giant shard of ice was heading your way. You leapt backwards and to the side to avoid it, instantly turning into your wolf form for the extra speed and reaction time. A blast of flame hit where you were about to run, blocking you off before a sheet of ice sped across the ground towards you, making you twist your body to leap again out of the way. Damn him, you needed to get closer to get ahead. He was doing too good of a job pinning you back. A pillar of ice was building towards you, and to Shoto's surprise, you ran to meet it, kicking off the ground in time to let it propel you into the air. From the angle you jumped, you were able to fall in a diagonal line in his direction, using his second of surprise to snap your jaws at him, catching a thread of his shirt in your fangs right before he made a move to attack you with a fist covered in flames. You felt your side heat up, your fur protecting you from the burn as you slid away from his hand, staying as close as you could to take another bite, securing your jaws around his ice arm and throwing your head back. With your huge wolf form, you could easily throw him over your head to slam him to the ground, feeling victorious. The feeling of victory vanished as a pillar of ice smacked into your jaw from beneath, throwing you roughly in the air, landing awkwardly with a whimper and losing your wolf form due to the damage sustained. But you could still stand your ground, damn it. Scrambling into a crouch, you anticipated the next attack, knees bent and ready to dodge, but nothing happened. Across the battlefield, Shoto's eyes were wide and dilated, focused on the small skin-colored strip in front of him where you just were. Your stomach dropped as your hands went to your bare neck, confirming that you had, in fact, lost your collar. Oh fuck. The sounds of low growls turned your attention to the two sets of classes, the alphas one by one locking onto you with their eyes before looking at each other, anticipating a fight with whoever was closest. It ached your heart to see your class start to turn on each other, but you knew you couldn't just stand there and watch. You had to run and pray your scent would dissipate. As you made a move to turn and run, a giant dome of ice erupted around you, trapping you and Todoroki inside it and blocking off the outside world. All while he slowly approached, a strange look across his face. Double fuck. And Omega, I thought I smelled one earlier, you're mine. His eyes were practically black with how heavily dilated they were, and the growl in his voice brought an instant panicked whimper out of your throat, your Omega threatening to submit. Shoto, please don't. You lifted a hand, begging him to stop as he sauntered closer, holding your breath to avoid the waves of pheromones from him. This wasn't Shoto, this wasn't anyone, this was the alpha hormones taking over completely. A small part of you was relieved you were encased, that your scent maybe wasn't making the alphas outside the ice dome fight. If you only had to deal with one alpha while trapped and afraid, then that was the better of two evils. You dropped your hair over your neck, hoping it might cover your scent just a little as you continued to plead. Just plug your nose. Stay back please, Shoto, don't do this. Were you hiding, little Omega, scared of the alphas attacking you? Just let me bite you, let me claim you, they won't ever touch you. He was salivating, eyes locked on your neck as you backed away, pressed to the freezing arch of the dome, your breath viable in front of you, coming in quick panicked puffs. No, please, this isn't what you want, Shoto. Just stop. He was kneeling over you now, his nose inhaling your neck with a low growl as your pulse raced, feeling like he was high on the sweetest drug. Your pills let you hold off on your instinct to bend to his whims as long as you didn't take a deep breath, which was difficult when it was so cold. His warm hand cupped your throat, tilting your head back as his breath fanned against the bare flesh, his teeth dangerously close. It wouldn't mean a mating bond if it was a one-sided bite, but it ran the risk of him being lost to his instincts forever. You'd never be able to shake him off. Even if you weren't mated, it would be dooming him to feel half empty forever. No, don't please. WHHRRRRRRRRR. Both of your eyes snapped to your right where two balls of light began to spread across the outside of the ice, glowing brighter and brighter right before. Boom boom. Your eyes shut tightly in time for shards of ice to explode everywhere, catching your arms that covered your face and slicing your flesh in narrow scratches. Your BLD speckled a little across Shoto's shocked face before a deep growl vibrated from this chest at the newcomer to the ice dome who had just blown a hole through it. I should have expected as much from you. Icy hot wasn't your mom and Omega that your dad cornered too. That voice. Hugo. TCH. Red eyes narrowed down at you briefly before he puffed his chest and stood between you and the out-of-control Shoto. The urge to hold your breath entirely flooded you as you saw him so close to you. Strangely, he didn't seem like he was in a rutting fit. He wasn't even growing like Shoto was. Not did his eyes seem as dilated when he had glared down at you. Could he not smell you? No, he'd all but admitted to acknowledging that you were an Omega. And he was definitely an Alpha. What was happening? Stay behind me, got it? He snarled over his shoulder in his usual aggressive tone, and you nodded quickly to his command, shrinking under his protectiveness. Anything to avoid Shoto's teeth. You're not stealing my Omega, Shoto snarled, making a move with an ice-covered arm to slash at Hugo, who dodged, tucking under the punch swiftly to swing his own glowing fist into his stomach, setting off an explosion that winded Shoto long enough for Hugo to turn and cover you with his gym jacket and wrap his arms under your legs and back. You need better protection than a damn collar, he growled under his breath, feeling much more how you affected him now that he was touching you and feeling your BLD smudge across his flesh. He had been watching with interest as you held your ground with Todoroki, but the second his eyes sliced off your collar, his whole body had stiffened. It was in that moment that the true extent of your sense effect on him made itself known. He needed you, he had to have you, no matter what. As soon as he saw the way Todoroki reacted, he was coiled and ready to leap in and claim you before he even had a chance. FRK, what a mating bond meant. You were his end of story. But as the ice dome surrounded you and your scent was muffled, his mind cleared, but his body was still fired up. He could hear your pleading from within the dome and knew he had to rescue you, but he had to be smart. If he broke into it, your scent would make him fight Todoroki instead of making sure you got out safely. Why the fuck did he suddenly care about your safety? He was confused, but time was being wasted. He could think about it later, but first he had to get you out of there. He would have to hold his breath. As the other alphas around him were locked in a rutting state of mind, he dodged out of the way and ran for the surface of the dome, placing his hands on the ice and rapidly storing a large explosion in each palm as close to where you were as possible without blasting you too. He took a deep breath. Boom boom. Seeing you scared on the floor with Todoroki standing over you was enough to keep his head straight through the waves of your Omega scent that tickled his taste bud. He had to ignore it. You had to remain safe from both Todoroki and himself. He barked at you to keep behind him, focusing on avoiding the simple sloppy attack from Shoto before winding him long enough to turn to you, muffling your scent with his jacket so that he could pick you up, trying to shake off the temptation to bite you himself. He turned for the shattered hole in the ice dome and sprinted from it, carrying you away and towards the waiting teachers and a very uneasy Midnight who was holding her palms up threateningly at Bakugo. Let her go. Katsuki, don't be controlled by your alpha instincts. She trailed off in shock as he simply walked over and set you down, ignoring the BLD from your cut-up arms that stained his own skin and shirt. You watched as he took a step back and turned his head away as he spoke, ignoring you completely. What kind of alpha was he? Did he already have an Omega? She needs the nurse, he states plainly before walking away, ignoring his classmates that were either the betas watching with dropped jaws or the alphas knocked out on the floor from Midnight's quirk. Still holding his breath and aware of the nitro stagnating in his veins, he took his time so that he could see Shoto run out of the dome and get instantly knocked out by Midnight's quirk and fall on his face. With a satisfied smirk, he took off in a gentle jog to the bathrooms. You have a lot of explaining to do, young lady, Midnight barked, crossing her arms and leaning against the nurse's office door she had just closed behind her, a little worn out after having to knock out most of Class A and B. Now, Midnight, be gentle. Being an Omega is a scary thing. She has justifiable reasons for keeping it a secret. Recovery girl cooed as she took your temperature and pulse, trying to keep you calm. Still, the staff should have been alerted. God forbid an alpha teacher was around her. Midnight's side, taking a seat on the end of your bed, looking like a disappointed mother as she watched Recovery girl take off the pressure cuff. The whole time your eyes were on your hands folded in your lap. Shame, anxiety, and guilt flooded you from the moment you saw your collar broken on the floor. Let alone from Midnight's words, she was right, you should have let the staff know. But you had feared it would mean they would discontinue your studies with lying on top of everything. You were sure that expulsion was being discussed as you sat helplessly. Dear, what precautions have you been taking? Recovery girl asked slowly as she wrote the results of your BLD pressure and temperature, and you finally lifted your eyes to look at her curiously. The collar, scent blocker, and suppressant pills. You listed, and her brow quirked. How many pills a day? A few, for most of the time. 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. You quickly stopped talking as you saw both Recovery girl and Midnight's eyes go wide. 4. 1 is plenty. Unnecessary even when using blocker and a collar. Oh, you swallowed hard and looked back down at your lap again. So what does that mean for me? You were afraid to ask. Even more so as Recovery girl hesitated. Well, it's thrown your body into rebellion. Your hormones and pheromones are very out of tune with each other. I recommend taking 1 pill a day and using a little bit of scent blocker on your neck. To be completely frank, I'd say stop the pills altogether for a week just to let your body acclimatize and cool off. But won't that kick off a heat? Recovery girl paused and shared a look with Midnight. You'd need to take a supervised week off. In that case, Midnight will be on hand to help sedate you through the worst parts. Sedated. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, you guessed. Although it made your stomach twist in knots. Would a heat be that bad? Bad enough that you'd have to be made unconscious for your safety and the safety of your alpha classmates. I'd also recommend taking the rest of the day to relax too. Keep yourself occupied in your room and keep to yourself for a while. There'll be a lot of questions that Midnight will answer before the students return to the dorms this afternoon. They'll be instructed to not bother you about it or risk severe consequences. You nodded slowly, your eyes on your hands in your lap, ashamed of all the hassle you'd caused in such a short amount of time. As nice as Recovery girl was being about it all, Midnight's bitter reaction was one you expected everyone was having currently. Exposing your scent to not only Class A, but Class B too meant that they would also be getting a lecture on the troublesome Omega that resided within the school. Your stomach turned at the thought of Class B. They could be arrogant and teasing at the best of times, let alone with the knowledge Class A had an Omega distracting them 24/7. Now, go rest. Bakugo stared out of the classroom window as Midnight gave an impromptu lecture on Omegas in society, and the rules the class would need to follow around the Omega that was attending class with them. Ew. He couldn't keep his mind off of how your face looked when he burst into the ice dome. The way that your eyes filled with hope and fear the moment they fell on him. Goosebumps raised across his arms as he closed his eyes, his alpha instincts stirring inside. And he glanced back over to Midnight, zoning briefly back into her lecture. So I will remind you all now. Alphas, keep your distance. The next few weeks will be very difficult for our Omega student, and she will need a lot of support from her friends and space from Alphas. Any Alpha caught harassing her will risk expulsion. Understood? Yes, Midnight, the class mumbled back, and with a bow, Midnight excused herself and left the classroom to tend to you back at the dorms. Geez, I never thought we'd ever see an Omega, let alone have one in our class, Zero whispered as he turned in his chair to Kaminari, who nodded in return. Yeah, it felt so strange, like I needed to tear out a throat the second I could smell her. It was not me. Dude, he chuckled anxiously, obviously unnerved by how his instincts controlled him. I guess being an alpha isn't all it's cracked up to be, Zero teased, and Kaminari crossed his arms. I'm stronger and faster than a beta boy like you. I just have to block my nose around her. I can do that. TCH, you think you can hold your breath all day? Dunce face. Bakugo rolled his eyes at the way Kaminari was brushing off the incident. Oh, I guess not. She wasn't even in a heat today, and you all turned to savages. Can you imagine what you'll act like if you catch a whiff of that? The bell rang and Bakugo stood up, throwing his bag over his shoulder, his eyes still narrowed down at Kaminari and Zero. Though the latter was no threat at all, a beta was someone he didn't need to waste these words on. You'd better come up with a better plan, Short Circuit. He grumbled and headed for the door, feeling like a hypocrite. What was he going to do? He could smell you from the school now that you didn't have a collar, let alone when you were wearing every type of blocker under the sun. He was in much more trouble than the others. From what he could see, no one else was as fine-tuned into your scent as Bakugo seemed to be. Each step back to the dorms was like following breadcrumbs, your scent leaving a trail that strengthened the second he opened the door. He noticed a few heads lift as they stepped inside, their eyes locking on the stairs where your scent was strongest, and some of them went back outside, Todoroki being one of them. Good. Bakugo held off the urge to growl possessively and followed Kiri into the kitchen, seeing his alpha friend as happy as always, seemingly unaffected as the rest. Weird day, huh? He gave a toothy grin and poured a glass of orange juice for himself, offering a glass to Bakugo, who refused, simply watching his friend closely. I never thought an Omega would go to UA. Must be pretty scary for her, especially after today. I hope she's okay. What? The red-haired hero gave Bakugo a puzzled look as he noticed the intense glare the blonde had laser-focused on him. What's wrong? Are you an alpha? His bluntness made Kirishima choke on his orange juice a little. After a small coughing fit, he placed it down and frowned in confusion at his friend. Of course I am. What makes you ask? Bakugo sighed and looked towards the stairs before back to Kiri. Can you even smell her? Kirishima looked more confused as he slowly nodded. Well, yeah, all of us can. What's your point? Bakugo sucked his teeth with a TCH and poured himself a drink. You don't seem as wound up as everyone else is. Kirishima chuckled and shrugged, earning a suspicious glare from the blonde. Maybe she's just not meant for me, bro. I can barely smell her unless she's standing right in front of me. Maybe her blockers work really well on me, or I'm not meant to be her alpha. Either way, I'm happy I can be around her without letting instincts control me. I'm not meant to be her alpha. Kirishima's words circled in Bakugo's head as his attention drifted to the stairs once more. He didn't see the knowing smirk that spread across Kirishima's face, nor the pair of eyes that watched him closely across the room. How is she? Mina asked, waiting patiently outside your room as Ochako came out, carrying a few empty plates and cups from tonight's dinner that she had taken up for you. Mina took half the load and watched closely as Ochako sighed, motioning to go down the hall before she began to speak. She's not great. It's been a few days without her medication and she's starting to kick into a heat. Her room is pretty trashed and she's curled up in her wolf form, whimpering after lots of encouragement to eat. I can't imagine what she's going through, Mina said softly, her heart aching for you. Due to your unblocked scent, Mina hadn't been in contact with you since the day of the ice dome, and it hurt her deeply that she couldn't be there for you right now. Maybe an alpha scent will comfort her. I can sit with her. And Ochako cut her off with a wave of her hand and a sad apologetic look. You can't, seriously. It's not what you think. I've looked it up and it's not a good idea. She's not herself at all, and a heat is something more complicated than craving the presence of an alpha. Mina pouted but nodded, glancing down the hall to your door before turning the corner to go down the staircase. I hope it's over quickly for her. Inside your room was chaos. Clothes, blankets, pillows, and all sorts of personal objects were scattered haphazardly around in an impulsive need to redecorate 100 times over. To stop your hands from pulling the lights out of the ceiling, you transformed into your wolf form and sat by the window, watching the moon rise hour by hour while constantly fidgeting to try and get comfortable, if Ochako's studies were to be believed. This was a preheat, an insistent need to get your den in order and find a mate ahead of her actual heat. It was torture, and what was worse was knowing this was only the beginning of it all. A low whine came from your throat as you watched the trees bend in the gentle breeze. A few hundred meters outside your window, a lush thick forest was a view you were lucky to have from your dorm room, and your paw gently scratched at the window frame longingly. Maybe a run would help burn enough energy so you could sleep. No, what if you ran into an alpha out there? It wasn't worth the risk. A softer whine filled the room as you began to pace again, stepping over books and photos and socks that you had strewn everywhere. Tidy, you had to tidy. This was all clutter and making you feel even worse. So just tidy, you told yourself over and over again in your head, but you couldn't bring yourself to transform back into your human form and begin. Instead, you jumped onto your bed and curled up tightly. You were told Omegas were special things rare people treasured beyond the purest gold many years ago and treated as ethereal beings. What bullshit. Who would feel any of that when getting tortured by their own body and mind? You rolled onto your back and stretched out, closing your eyes and trying to relax, willing yourself to turn back into a human. Slowly, almost reluctantly, your body melded back into your human self and you sighed deeply. The slow transformation had burned a little of your boundless energy and you felt a little more at peace. Laughter could be heard from downstairs and you closed your eyes, listening closely to hear who was down there. If you couldn't be there, you could at least try to keep in the loop. You could hear Gyro telling someone off, followed by Ida giving a speech about something you couldn't quite make out. Shortly after, there were steps coming up the stairs, sounding rather angry. Slowly, a delicious smell tickled your nose and without thinking you inhaled deeply to draw it in. Immediately your pulse raced, sending shocks around your body that made your extremities tingle in a way that felt so damn good. Alpha, the whispered words were ripped from your lips as you panted softly, your knees rubbing together to cause some much-needed friction between your flushed thighs at the presence of the alpha coming closer. If you weren't sure you were nearly in heat before, this definitely affirmed it for you. It was like a switch had been pressed and an intense feeling of arousal had taken over every nerve in your body. As they walked down the hall, you inhaled once more, your body acting on its own as you bit your lower lip and slipped your hands down your body to the hem of your shirt. Your fingertips grazed over the bare flesh beneath and feeling all the goosebumps across your belly and hips raised by the scent that now lingered outside the door, as if to let you enjoy this feeling for as long as you wanted, driving you further into bliss. With no more sense of control left in your body, you raised your nose to the air and drew more of their scent in, feeling a wetness spreading shamelessly between your folds as your legs spread, imagining the figure of the unknown alpha braced over you, their features hidden in shadow in the darkness. An embarrassed blush was the only remnant of your actual feelings as your body burned in growing need for an alpha to come and claim you right this instant. MMMM. Alpha, you whined softly, almost a whisper as your hips rolled to grind the air while your hands roamed further upward under your shirt. In your brief moments of conscious action, you wondered who it was outside letting you practically bathe in their scent without bursting in. You were sure your own pheromones were coming off of you in wild waves that must be driving them. As mad as you currently were, how were they keeping their cool? Who were they? Their self-restraint challenged you to keep your own and not open the door to beg them to take you. You'd die of shame if you threw yourself at some poor alpha in a fit of heat-induced horniness you were also quite sure you couldn't stand if you tried. But curiosity was overtaking your mind and you inhaled deeply to try to distinguish the scent. Who was there? Why couldn't you identify anyone in this state? By taking in more and more of their pheromones, you were driving yourself closer and closer to madness. You needed them now. You needed them to touch you, breed you, claim you. Fuck please, Alpha, you begged, pride long gone as you palmed and massaged your melons for some contact. But as quickly as the scent had come, it was gone. Your nose desperately searched the air, but the alpha had appeared to have disappeared after your plea. Nerve by nerve, you came down from your pheromone-induced high and felt shame creep through you instead. I scared them off. You blushed and turned in your bed to shove your face into a pillow to hide away from the world. What would they think of you? At least they didn't see the panting, soaking mess you were. But begging for some random unknown classmate to come in and breed you was beyond mortifying enough. Sleep, just sleep, you groaned into the pillow, wanting this week to be long over already. Fr King Beach Hugo growled as he stomped upstairs and away from the lecture Ida was trying to give. All he had done was make a simple comment to that weird ear girl about how awful her cooking skills were. He didn't need the class rep to climb up his ass about it. So he had just walked away. He wanted an early night anyway, so it was just a good enough excuse to leave without the usual comments about being a party pooper. His nose caught your scent from the other end of the hallway and he glanced over his shoulder towards it, taking a soft breath in, just enough to give him a slight high. It was something that was almost becoming a habit. He told himself it was to get used to it, to build an immunity. He wouldn't be distracted like the others and fuck up his hero training over it. He was the best. He could train himself to get over it. But his timing couldn't have been worse. His innocent small sniff had opened his senses to something primal that constricted his veins and brought an immediate unwanted erection in his pants. He growled lowly and held back the urge to run to your door. Heat. FRK, you were in the midst of a heat wave. His ears picked up on your gentle moans and he frowned. Were you with someone? Who? Before he registered his legs even moving, he was in your part of the hallway, his eyes wide and staring. His BLD red eyes were locked on the space just outside your door where someone stood with their hands tight around your door frame, a wild look in their eyes that was glued to the door handle. Hey you, what the fuck do you think you're doing, Dunceface? The electric blonde at your door didn't even blink as Hugo growled, feeling his whole body tense at seeing the other alpha so close to you in this state. Kaminaris' mind was lost to the scent of the horny Omega beyond the door and he stared longingly at the handle, eager to turn it and fulfill your current need. He knew you could smell him. You had to be calling for him. I need to. His hand wrapped around the door handle, his eyes wide and hungry, but he didn't even get the chance to start turning the handle. Within a second, Hugo had grabbed Kaminari and thrown him against the wall beside your door, using his arm under his chin to keep him pinned, snarling silently with his teeth bared, your scent bringing out a feralness in him from being so close. Snap out of it, you said. You'd hold your breath, right? Hold it now. He growled lowly through clenched teeth, just about audible over the sounds of your panting and whimpering the other side of the door. FRK if it didn't drive him insane. But having this rival alpha in front of him was helping to push those darker thoughts aside. His urge to blast his friend to pieces was stronger than his current urge to mate. His rough grip on Kaminari was doing the same to the yellow-eyed hero as his once hazy gaze was laser-focused on Bakugo, fury building in him that sent crackles of electricity into the air. "Let me go before I shock you to death," he growled in a tone that really didn't suit him at all. The menace and venom in his voice was so unlike the usual happy and ditzy Kaminari that Bakugo knew, and it shook him for a moment. His hesitation lasted just enough for Kaminari to wiggle out from his arm and push him back, the two alphas now challenging each other, giving off dominating waves. "If we get caught here we could get expelled, is that what you want?" Bakugo said slowly, trying not to growl too loudly and draw any more attention. He didn't want anyone to come up here, and he certainly didn't want you to know he was here. If you called his name right now he wasn't sure he could keep his head. "I want her, I need her." Kaminari tilted his head back to sniff and shivered in pleasure, which made Bakugo snarl possessively. "No you don't, your brain is fried, Dunceface, hold your breath. She's so wet you can smell how badly she needs me. How badly she wants me to be her alpha and claim her tight little." Smack. In a split second, Kaminari had gone from drooling to bleeding. His form was crumpled unconscious on the ground, his nose clearly broken, and Bakugo standing over him, holding his BLDY knuckles. "King Dunceface," he sighed, careful not to breathe too deeply. He hunched down and lifted his friend over his shoulder, not caring for the dripping BLD that began to stain the back of his shirt. "You're not gonna hear this when you're awake, but sorry," he grumbled before carrying the electric hero back to his own room to take care of him, deeply concerned about the effect of having an Omega around the class full of alphas. That definitely wasn't the normal friendly and dorky Kaminari who was standing outside your room. That was just another mindless alpha, and yet another warning for Bakugo to keep his distance from you. His biggest nightmare was shown to him in those few minutes against Kaminari. He never wanted to lose control the way his friend just had over something so stupid as an Omega. To be someone else completely due to his inner alpha was a deeply troubling thought to him, especially when your influence was out of control in a heat. It was more than enough motivation to want to stay as far away from you as possible, at least through your heat. "Katsuki." Bakugo shuddered as you moaned his name against his neck. His hands gripped your hips tighter, pulling you down on him slowly and feeling your wet slit tease his pee-pee. This was everything he had wanted from the moment he first caught your scent. To have you whimpering and moaning in his arms at the peak of your heat, calling his name his. He bucked his hips up to sink himself further into you, and you moaned deliciously against his throat with your nails digging into his shoulders. "FRK, you feel so tight, my Omega," he growled happily, groaning as you began to roll your hips and ride him, your eyes glazed in heat lust. It took every drop of his self-control to not listen to his inner alpha and pin you to the bed and fuck you as hard as he truly wanted to. "Alpha," you whimpered, lifting your face to look into his eyes that were glazed over just like your own in pure instinctive lust. Hearing you call him Alpha pushed him off the edge. He grabbed your thighs and roughly flipped you, pinning you beneath him on your front while you whimpered submissively, desperate to be taken by him like the helpless Omega you currently were. It was a side he had never seen of you. Normally you were so fierce and fiery, if any of the girls would turn out to be an alpha he was sure it was going to be. Yet here you were just an Omega whining under him in a powerful heat that had completely changed you. It bugged him deep down, but right now his surface thoughts were taking over him. He was going to enjoy you now and worry later. "Katsuki, why?" And he sighed deeply as he slid back into you, enjoying every inch. "Bakugo, FRK, why? And you're so tight and perfect." "What?" Bakugo. His hazy lust shattered as he felt himself wake up, still holding tight and grinding into his pillow that had served as you in his dream. A knock at his bedroom door sounded before the unmistakable voice of Kirishima called out his name again. "Are you up yet, man? You're gonna miss breakfast." Bakugo looked around in confusion, throwing the pillow that was launched between his legs away from him, the dream filling him with guilt and anger. Yeah, I'm up." "FRK off already?" Bakugo growled, his throbbing hard-on insistent on still thinking it was inside you and causing his balls to ache. He knew it would take a while to subside on its own, but he refused to jerk off to relive the irritation on principle. "FRK. It had almost been a full week of your heat, and every single night he fell asleep to the faint scent of it that trailed from your room that you were no longer in. For your safety, Midnight had organized for you to stay in separate accommodation and remain under her sedation until it was over. You were due to come back and be in classes any day now after an injection that was supposed to dull any future effect of a heat from causing another giant distraction for you in the school. But your disappearance hadn't made any difference in Bakugo's mind. It felt like you were still around, your Omega taunting him somehow. Each night he would dream of you, and last night had a new level. His brain was obsessed. It infuriated him that his own body and mind were acting out of his control at the very memory of the dumb Omega that happened to be in his class. After breakfast, the class made their way together to the school, Bakugo walking behind with Kirishima and Kaminari flanking him, a slight bruise across his face from when Bakugo had snapped him out of his wild rut. There wasn't any hard feelings between the two, just caution. "So having nightmares?" Kirishima asked, and Bakugo growled in response defensively. Had Kiri heard him? Had he heard him moaning your name? "What the hell are you talking about, shitty hair?" He decided to feign ignorance while Kaminari shifted to walk a little further away, out of accidental blast distance. "You seemed really restless last night. You woke me up a few times through the wall with how much you were moving around in your sleep." Bakugo rolled his eyes, passing Kirishima, who held the door open for the trio to walk into the school building. "I slept just fine," he snapped, walking a little faster down the hallway to hopefully get into class and cut off his thread Kiri was tugging on. "You were talking a lot in your sleep too, moaning." "Shitty hair," Bakugo warned, but a slight smirk pulled at Kirishima's mouth. "I kept hearing one name in particular a lot." "Shut your dumb face." Kaminari winced at the snarl from Bakugo, looking at Kirishima as though he had a death wish, but the redhead was smirking triumphantly ever so slightly. "I think that name was O-Y-N. You're back. Hey Kaminari." You smiled at the alpha gawking in the doorway, blissfully unaware of how he nearly barged into your room and mated you just over a week ago. In fact, the entire week had felt like you were blissfully unaware. One minute you're in a painful preheat, the next you're awake in a strange room with midnight and a nurse at your side telling you that an entire week has passed by. Refreshed was just scraping the surface of how you felt, however. Many of your Omega symptoms seemed dialed back, and the alpha sense around you felt more like a comfort rather than a big red warning flag. You had assumed the suppressant injection had a lot to do with that, though. A few physical things had changed too during your first heat. The golden yellow hue of your eyes had taken on a much less bold color, seeming to resemble melted gold with flecks of yellow that made your irises glitter. Your lashes were thicker and your lips ever so slightly tinted a shade darker to emphasize them. Your body's curves had deepened, particularly around the hips and bust, but not to a ridiculous degree, just subtlety. After you had woken up, you had spent a solid hour checking out every change in the mirror, almost glad to be an Omega for once if it meant you'd end up looking closer to a supermodel. Not that you were overly fond of the idea before. Midnight explained that this was perfectly normal after a first heat and that your body was trying its best to lure a mate, and it should actually take away some strain from your senses that were extra enhanced from your Omega gender. So now, instead of an invading wall of powerful musk, you could smell each and every individual alpha scent in the room, able to pick out all the subtle notes without crumbling into horny pieces. Some were sweet, some musker, some smokier. You tested out Kaminari. When he had greeted you, he had a faint smell of peppermint within his scent, which surprised you along with cinnamon. A smile spread across your face when you realized your pulse barely picked up from inhaling the alpha's pheromones. Looking to everyone else like you were just happy to see the electric blonde. You were so busy being proud of your handle on your Omega, you didn't notice the way that Kaminari hadn't come closer and was still lingering in the doorway guiltily, blocking Kirishima and Bakugo, who was swiftly running out of patience. "Move it, dunce-face," Bakugo bellowed, shouldering his friend to barge past. His voice drew your attention to him, and your eyes followed as he stormed to his seat a few rows ahead of you to the right. You couldn't help the soft inhale that allowed his scent to fill your senses. Caramel that was always there before, but it seemed especially delicious now, suppressant or not. His scent in particular was still affecting you more than the others. Damn, your pulse was already picking up and your thighs began to warm. A flush started to creep up your neck and you angrily turned away, trying to zone into a conversation Yaoyorozu and Asui were having about the midterm examinations to distract your body. But as hard as you tried, you couldn't stop your nose from focusing on Bakugo. It was addictive and dangerous. What kind of alpha would he be anyway to an Omega? A dominating and heartless one, probably. Then again, he did save you from Shoto, and he did it without losing his mind like the others. You had to question whether or not he had his own Omega already. You were so lost in his scent that you barely noticed your Uraraka had come in and had wrapped her arms around you in a strong hug. You're back. A small noise of shock left your mouth as you snapped back into reality, looking up to see your best friend's grin, feeling one of your own stretch happily across your face. Yup, back and ready to kick some ass. Your Uraraka laughed and let you go, moving to take her seat a few tables ahead of you so that she wouldn't get caught out of her seat when the bell rang. "How are you? You look like you're feeling better." You nodded and smiled, seeing her light up. The last time you saw her, she was trying her best to soothe you through the preheat and get you to eat something. Her once concerned face was replaced with relief and joy at seeing her friend look back to normal. "Well, I hope so. This alpha wants some sugar." The blaring voice of Mina made everyone look up in time to see her charge to the center of the room, arms wide open, but giving you enough space to stay away if you wanted to. Her brilliant grin hid the way her eyes watered cautiously, fearing your rejection. Your cheeks flushed a little in embarrassment, but you stood up and met your friend with a tight hug. Her alpha presence wrapped around you, feeling incredibly soothing, ridding you of your embarrassment quickly. I missed you, girl. She almost sobbed dramatically, burying her face into your shoulder and squeezing you tighter. Mina had worried if she would ever be able to be this close around you again after Uraraka's warning about your heat. Seeing you back to your normal self again had filled her with hope. And now that you were actively hugging her back, she was flooded with relief. I missed you too, Mina. Giarararararar. A low, dominating, and very pissed-off growl made the class fall silent, and you and Mina stepped apart. An overwhelming need to cower flooded you, while Mina instinctively took it as a challenge, standing in front of you protectively, her eyes scanning for the source. The low rumble continued as the growling stopped, resonating angrily from Bakugo's table along with two thin streams of smoke. Kirishima frowned down at his friend, aware of how tightly his hands were balled up. He was prepared to activate his hardening at any moment, watching the steady stream of smoke pouring from between Bakugo's clenched fingers. You okay, man? As if a spell had broken, Bakugo looked up to Kirishima and loosened his hands before looking around to see the rest of the class staring at him. Mina was still holding a defensive pose from the center of the room. One arm arched back to cross over you, her eyes narrowed on him. Oh shit, was that him that was growling? He cleared his throat and scowled, pushing back the mortified blush that tinted his ears pink. Geez, the damn Omega is back. Can you all just shut the hell up? It's annoying as fuck. Did you really have to get everyone riled up for that? Momo sighed, fixing her ponytail causally to relax from the adrenaline surge of a challenging alpha presence. Near the back of the class, Takoyami was soothing an irritated dark shadow, and Shoto's table was dusted with ice veins, both males having reacted harshly to Bakugo's possessive growl. Around the room, the alphas were on edge, trying to cool off while you looked away in shame. I can't apologize enough for what I'm putting everyone through. I'll try get a better hold on my Omega side so that it won't be a distraction, I promise. Mina huffed and crossed her arms. Why, and it's not you who should apologize. You did nothing wrong. Her eyes narrowed to Bakugo, who was glaring down at his paper. You didn't threaten everyone with a challenge. TCH, go to hell, you damn idiots. Bakugo snarled, his eyes meeting yours for a brief moment, finally looking at you and taking in all of the changes that had happened since her heat. With your Lycan abilities, you noticed the way his eyes widened ever so slightly before angrily turning away. Was that guilt, shame, embarrassment? It all happened too quickly to gauge. The air in the class remained heavy after Bakugo's outburst long after Mr. Aizawa had begun his lecture. The alphas were all obviously still a little on edge, and although it wasn't directly your fault, you still felt awful about it. Your eyes kept drifting to the back of Bakugo, hunched boredly over his notes and glaring out the window as angry as ever. Beside him, Kirishima took notes with a deeply confused face, often scribbling as fast as he could to take down every word Aizawa was saying. No matter how hard he tried, he always needed extra help from Bakugo, who would always begrudgingly tutor his little Baka squad. Over the last few years, you dipped in and out of his tutoring, finding out just how sharp-minded Bakugo was, even when he never took that many notes. Without his occasional help, you don't think that you or half the class would have passed the written exams. As if he could feel your eyes in his direction, Kirishima glanced over his shoulder, awkwardly meeting your eyes for a moment before a blush splashed across your cheeks and you put your head down to write nonsense to seem busy, mortified at being caught. Kiri chuckled softly and went back to his notes, but his mind was on you. He couldn't quite smell you like the other alphas seemed to, especially not as strongly as Bakugo did. It confused him. Could the others tell? Was he even normal? Well, normal for an alpha. His eyes drifted to Bakugo, who was staring down at his paper and almost choked at what he saw. A little doodle of a goofy-looking wolf was scribbled on the edge of the paper with some explosions lines around it. Lunch had begun and you wandered with Mina and Ochako to the cafeteria together, chatting about nothing in particular when you felt a shoulder brush you hard, knocking you forward a few steps. What the hell? You looked around to see two boys from Class B smirking down at you, walking in front of the three of you and stopping to block you. Look who's come back. The little Omega. Is it true you had to take a whole week off getting fucked over and over just to ease your heat? Your mouth dropped in pure mortification, your stomach dropping. Was that what everyone thought? Did they all think you were just a slutty Omega? Was that what everyone was saying while you were basically in an induced coma for a week? You rubbed your arm and looked down, feeling your heart shatter in shame. Mina sensed your immediate dip in mood and growled lowly, pulling you behind her while Ochako placed her hand on your shoulder, puffing her cheeks angrily. You better shut your disgusting mouths right now before I wash them out with acid, Mina warned, her words practically dripping with her quirk. The boys laughed, towering over Mina with grins, and sniffed her, craning their necks to give you a sniff after, sending a horrible chill down your spine as their pupils dilated. She's still fair game from the smell of it. Back off, female. They laughed in her face, seeing a female alpha as no threat in their way to claiming an Omega. You cowered lowly behind Mina as they continued to sniff at you, holding your breath to suppress their alpha influence on you. What's wrong? Is the little Omega embarrassed? You know the rules. You could get expelled for talking like that, Ochako said, standing her ground between the boys and Mina to quell the rising hormones, leaving you on your own behind the girls. You squirmed uncomfortably, a soft whine accidentally slipping from your mouth that made Mina and the boys snap their attention fully back to you, and you squeaked, covering your mouth with your hand. I am sorry. Hey, you fucking extras. A booming voice from behind you took all of the attention and your side in relief, turning and blushing furiously as you saw Bakugo, Kaminari, and Kirishima walking side by side towards you, deep and protective snarls on their faces. It was hot. The way they all marched towards you side by side, alpha pheromones coming off of them in powerful waves, just did something to you. You had to bite your cheek to suppress the happy moan that sat in your throat as they neared and practically smothered you with their scent, one in particular almost bringing you to your knees. Ugh. 5v2 is not what I want to do today, one of the Class B boys groaned while the other looked at you with a smirk. I bet you had each and every one of these alphas fucking your holes all week. Bet that's why they're so riled up on protecting you. Your furious blush deepened and you looked away in shame, especially since you had just been borderline drooling over your fellow classmates getting defensive over you seconds ago. FR King, beat it before I make you fucking die. Bakugo growled deeply, his challenging aura back in full swing, making you tremble. But as Kaminari, Mina, and Kirishima were on his side in this particular challenge, they didn't seem affected this time. They only bolstered him and bristled by his side, watching the two other alphas TCH and turn tail with bared teeth. You won't always have them around you, little Omega Beach. What did you call her? You felt Bakugo grab your upper arm in a surprisingly tender hold and tug you back to his chest, his protective alpha pheromones flooding your nose and making you curl into him on instinct. He didn't even blink as you let out a submissive and thankful whimper, laser focused on making sure the two rivals got the hint you were his. The two males lowered their heads with pathetic snarls before turning and leaving, not another word from their lips. Bakugo, you okay, man? Kirishima asked slowly when he saw that he hasn't moved an inch since scaring the Class B boys off, and neither had you. Ochako and Mina shared a curious look as they watched you too, not feeling the need to intervene with how gentle Bakugo was being with you. You lifted your eyes to see him panting ever so slightly from the adrenaline rush, his eyes still on the spot where they disappeared off to, and his hand still secure around your arm holding you to his chest. His heartbeat, though fast, was soothing to you, and you held off the urge to press your ear against his chest and relax to it. Was this what being in a mated pair would feel like all the time? Safe and protected in their arms. Kirishima cleared his throat loudly, and it seemed to snap Bakugo from his daze. He looked over to his friends, then to Mina and Ochako, and then finally down to you. You looked blissful, simply staring at his hand around your arm and deep in thought, and so goddamn beautiful. You looked so calm being so close to him. No one ever looked like that around him. FRK, he wanted to reach down and grab your face and kiss you so badly, but the presence of so many others around him snapped him out of it. He clenched his jaw and let you go, seeming to disturb you and make you almost pout as he turned to Mina, missing him already. Keep the creeps away from her and get her some goddamn food. I can hear her stomach from here. Your eyes widened. What an alpha thing to say. He cared that you were hungry. I'll talk to you later, he said. Barely a murmur, but he knew your hearing was better than most. Your stiff nod was enough for him to know you'd understood. What did he want to talk about? Why did it make you feel excited to be meeting with him later on your own? He turned to go, and Mina made her way to you, taking you by the hand and pulling you away to go get something to eat. With each step away, your chest ached pitifully. You glanced over your shoulder in time to lock eyes with Bakugo for a moment before he made a face of discomfort and turned away back to his friends. You knew it right then that you were in trouble, because your Omega had seemingly chosen Katsuki Bakugo. Damn those Class B perverts, Momo snarled, her composure wavering as Mina recounted the story in the changing room, looks of pity from the others landing on you as you shyly changed, keeping your back to them all, until you found your mate. This was your life now. You had to get used to it and learn to defend yourself rather than rely on friendly alphas stepping in. You tied your shoelaces and pouted, your fingers tightening on the lace in anger. It wasn't fair. Before the summer no one paid you any attention. Why couldn't you be that girl again? Why did your genes determine you'd be an object for some high-strung PPY asshole alpha? Why, you good? Gyro asked as she sat on the bench next to you, asking quietly enough that the uproaring sisterhood around you couldn't hear. You blinked at your shoelaces before letting them go and giving a sheepish smile. Yeah, I'm okay, it's just a big adjustment. She gave you a strange look before nodding and standing up. They're fierce, be fierce. Her comment staggered you, making your eyes widen fierce. What did she mean by that? Come on, why? And you were so confident and strong before all this. That hasn't changed. Your core never does. So don't let one part of you drown who you were meant to be, a hero. Her words slammed you and your eyes watered before you grinned up at her. Jira, thanks. She smiled and nodded, tilting her head to the door. Let's go warm up while these guys get it out of their system. You nodded eagerly and snuck out with her, stepping into the mild air with a determined smile. It was going to be difficult, but the old you is still there somewhere. You just had to find her again and stay tough. Gyro, come join us. Zero grinned as he and Kaminari stretched and limbered up. Kaminari looked up to you both before quickly putting his head back down. He hadn't quite forgiven himself yet. Defending you earlier didn't even start to make up for what he almost did to you. As you sat down to stretch your legs and arms near him, he stiffened up and turned his head away shamefully. You noticed and cringed, your determination crumbling a little. Oh, I'm sorry, I can go over there if it helps, Denki. His head shot up faster than his electricity ever could and his mouth hung open, causing Gyro to snicker. No, please, I promise you're not affecting me like that, he tried to say delicately, bringing a faint blush to his cheeks. I almost did a bad thing when you were in your heat and I just don't know how to apologize. I'm sorry. His head hung low and Ciro's eyes jumped between the two of you. What? You blinked and shook your head, reaching out to grab Kaminari's hands, making him lift his head to look at you, his whole body stiffening from being touched by an Omega. Hey, no, it's okay. Nothing happened, right? No harm, no foul. I accept your apology. His eyes lit up, a flicker of static crossing his fringe as he began to smile just a little. I can't forgive myself as easy, but thank you. It wasn't long before the rest of the class had taken your group's example and began to warm up in time for All Might and Present Mike to turn up. ALLRIGGHTTT. We have something planned for you heroes in training, Tada. You and the other alphas winced, your heightened hearing causing ringing almost instantly. Let me take it from here, Mike All Might said with some panic for the eardrums of his students. So, I need you all to partner up for me today. We're working on double battles in combat on the job. You will need to learn to quickly work alongside another's quirk in order to make the most of your situations, so double up and take an hour to practice before we put some brackets together. There was some excited whispering among the students along with some movement from people butting up. You immediately turned to look for Mina but found her already taking to Kirishima. You looked for Achako and saw her building up the courage to talk to Deku. Oh great. You looked around, finding that some of the alpha students were making a point of steering clear of you, and you growled an annoyed sigh. Wonderful. Oh Shoto, hey, you spun to face the half-hot half-cold user who bowed his head respectfully at you, making you tense and wave your hands to ask him to stop. Please, no need for that. He looked to one side before taking a calming breath and looking you dead in the eye, locking your joints. I need to make a formal apology for the way I acted last week. I wasn't myself, but I swear it won't happen again. Forgive me if you were able. He bowed his head again, flustering you once more to make him stop. No, it's okay. Everyone was in the same boat. I'm sorry, I'm not able to control my pheromones yet to be an easier classmate to be around. You laughed sheepishly. And he nodded. Geez, there was too many apologies flying around today. Well, to try and make up for it, I'd like to ask you a few things. You tilted your head in confusion and nodded to tell him to continue. Be my doubles partner. I think we could have some decent combinations. Well, what? You sweat dropped, staring at him as if he was mad. What combos could your wolf and his ice and fire have? The last time we fought, you used my ice to your mobile advantage. You seemed to be able to read it well enough to travel along it as it was moving. I would like to try that again. You pouted as you remembered your battle. You had done a good job of avoiding his attacks and using his predictable ice to your advantage, but would that be enough to go up against another pair with? Let's just try it out. What harm can it do? What harm can't it do? You sighed internally but nodded, agreeing to be his partner. Let's go find a big enough space to practice, but first, I have one other thing to ask, as a way to make up for my behavior. Oh, okay, what is it? He seemed to hesitate before straightening up and speaking boldly. Be my date for the Student Pro Hero Mixer next month. You stopped working. Full-blown EXE, 404 error, and not found. Are you serious? You almost yelled, quickly lowering your voice as people looked over to you. Are you serious? You whispered, waiting for him to smile and admit he was attempting to make another of his terrible jokes, but no smile. Only a determined look. I would be honored if you'd go with me. We are encouraged to bring dates to mimic the yearly gala. I'd be honored to bring you as my date. Oh, he was fucking serious. What were you supposed to say? Are you sure you want to ask me? Someone like Momo maybe. I want to invite you to help make up for before. You shook your head. Shoto, it's water under the bridge. I don't want you to invite me out of guilt. Then can I invite you because I want you to be there with me? Error 404 and not found. Well, then if you really want me to, then sure, I'll go with you. Yes, perfect. Again, Shoto yelled as you reverted back to human form to take your starting place. A thin sheen of sweat had begun to cover your forehead as you pushed yourself as hard as you could over the last hour of training, trying your best to prove that you were still hero material. Even Shoto had begun to look like he had pushed himself, his ice quirk working overtime to perfect your combinations. Now, he let out a thin trail of ice that you ran across, timing your steps perfectly and counting them as your cue to leap into wolf form and let the ice push you up into the air. Several more ice pillars came up in random places and you used your wolf reaction time to jump from each one, maneuvering the new terrain that Shoto set up for you. It was fun. You can't remember the last obstacle course that was this intense and randomized. The hardest part was when Shoto only made thin pillars for your paws to cling to, so you had to try harder to make sure you wouldn't just slide straight off. Together your quirks allowed you to dodge and travel very well, although without sparring partners you weren't sure how your duo would fare in combat. To finish up, Shoto created a loose pillar for you to use your body to push over as you jumped onto it, causing it to tip and crash to the ground and shard, leaving you standing on all fours in your wolf form, panting softly with your tail wagging happily in the icy mess. Goddamn, you missed being like this. In your wolf form you felt so free and secure, your whole body felt lighter and you could trust yourself so much more. Shoto smiled as he melted his ice and came over to you, looking quite proud. Great job, and I think we have a solid chance. Your tail wagged faster as you wiggled slightly and transformed back into your human form with a big grin. That was such a rush. You're so quick with your ice. It was a great exercise to keep up. From a few hundred yards away, Bakugo and Kaminari were working just as hard, the latter panting with his hands on his knees while Bakugo hadn't even broken a sweat, well, not one of overexertion anyway. Their ears picked up on your voice, happy and proud, and their heads turned to the melodic draw of it. You were laughing and cheering and talking excitedly with Shoto, your wolf ears poking out of the top of your head from your uncontained energy. You looked so proud of yourself. It almost brought a satisfied smirk to Bakugo's lips until he realized the reason you were so happy. Coming up close to you, Shoto was smiling too. Damn icy hot. Bakugo blinked and turned his head to face Kaminari, who had stolen the words from his mouth. Electricity crackled around him briefly in a genuinely fearsome display of alpha power before he simply growled lowly, taking the red-eyed blonde by surprise. Seems as though Kaminari felt as defensive about you as Bakugo did. The thought oddly soothed Bakugo as he flicked his eyes back over to watch you get pumped up to try Todoroki's little ice course again and felt his jaw clench. I'll show her who's the better alpha, not that icy hot, and damn well not Kaminari, you're mine. The possessive though slammed intrusively into his head and he froze up for a second before smirking. Come your next heat, he'd be there to show you what a real alpha is. Time is up. Get on over here for the main event. Your head rounded to present Mike, your confidence wavering a little now. Who would you be up against? Would it be a decent fight? Your eyes scanned over the other students, each one a potential enemy for the rounds to come, when your eyes landed on the cold stares of Bakugo and Kaminari. Not them, please don't be them. You pleaded to whatever higher power existed to not have you faced up against the two people here who you didn't stand much of a chance against, let alone how angrily they were looking at you. You went to drop your eyes and lower your head but caught yourself. Fierce be fierce. You grit your teeth and lifted your head high, giving the coldest look you could muster back, and they seemed a little shocked. Even from 100 yards away your eyes read one clear thing: you're going down. She's looking pumped. Where's that Omega gone? Zero snickered at his friends as he joined them with his teammate Sue, who nodded. She does seem to be more like her old self, Karo. Her old self? Bakugo asked, unable to bite his tongue and keep his nose out of it. Yeah man, don't you remember? She used to be a powerhouse. More energy than Kaminari's ultimate move, Zero said with a grin as he crossed his arms and watched you walk over to the rest of the class with your head high and confidence written all over you. Oh yeah, through this whole Omega ordeal I forgot how tough she usually was, Kaminari said quietly, making Bakugo snort. What were they talking about? You weren't anywhere near his level before. Why should he take any interest in your weak quirk now? He had to admit though, your confidence was really making you shine. Alright folks, we've drawn names from a hat while you were practicing, and here we go. All Might quickly stepped in with a piece of paper in his hand and cleared his throat. First, Mina Ashido and Kirishima v Minoru Mainta and Mezu Shoji. Second, Kuji Kuda and Mashiro Ajiro v Toru Hakugar and Yuuga Aoyama. Third, Hanada Shiro, Suyu Asui and Kyoka Jiro v Rikido Sato and Fumikage Takoyami. Fourth, Katsuki Bakugo and Denki Kaminari v Tenya Ida and Mono Yaoyorozo. Fifth, YNL and Shoto Todoroki v Ochako Uraraka and Izuku Midoriya. At first you relaxed when you heard you wouldn't be facing Bakugo or Kaminari, but then that only left two others. The most unpredictable student in the history of UA, Izuku, and your best friend who had fire in her eyes as she stared you down. Ochako, crap. You gulped at the intensity in her eyes and looked to Shoto, who gave a determined nod. They were probably the second worst team to go against. Izuku could destroy Shoto's ice like glass, and Ochako only had to touch you to put you in trouble. Hey, we have 4 whole matches to come up with a strategy, don't worry, Shoto whispered by your side. His eyes locked on the first doubles match as they took their places and began their fight. Your mouth hung slightly open, impressed by how cool and calculated he was being about it. He had faced Izuku a few times before, but now Izuku had Black Whip in his arsenal. So what do we do? The first 3 battles went by without any incident, clean fights with clear winners, but you weren't paying much attention. In fact, your eyes didn't look up from your huddle with Shoto until Bakugo and Kaminari walked forward to take their spot on the field. taking your full attention from the half-and-half user. As they walked past you, their eyes flicked over, feeling your gaze on them. Goosebumps rose against your skin and you fought the urge to look away shyly, choosing to stay calm and coldly turn back to Shoto to try zone back into what he was saying, but damn, it was hard. Momo and Ida made their way to the opposite side, their alpha presence alone luring the blondes to fight, slight growls already emanating from deep in their chests. All Might looked between the pairs cautiously before waving his hand to commence the battle. Die! Bakugo roared as he took a predictable charge at Ida while Kaminari started to run at Momo, aiming to touch her with his hands to zap her. Ida charged forward and then to the side, dodging Bakugo's explosions with accurate zigs and zags, taunting him and keeping him away from Momo as she pulled something from her stomach and threw it around herself like a cloak. "Ha, that trick again," Kaminari scoffed, turning his hand to a fist, aiming to land a solid punch to the face. Not quite. Momo smirked as she dodged the punch and grabbed his wrist. He let out a surge of electric that simply bounced off of Momo's cloak, surprising him. Hey, what are you doing? I can't stop." The sudden panic from Kaminari as his electricity flowed painfully from him distracted Bakugo enough that Ida was able to get a kick in, crashing into his ribs and sending him flying. Ida smirked and Momo revealed a lightning rod planted into the ground in front of her with wires attached to Kaminari's arm, forcing him to emit his electricity at a constant high rate, burning him out. FRK, Bakugo snarled, righting himself and flying through the air towards Momo, a hand outstretched to send a forceful explosion at her that made her stumble back and detach her wires from Kaminari. The electric blonde grunted as he stopped his output and staggered back, falling into Bakugo, who grabbed him and shoved the blonde behind him, borderline snarling as Ida and Momo regrouped. "This was more even than I expected," Shoto murmurs beside you and you nod, surprised that Bakugo in particular was on the losing foot for the first time ever. Momo and Ida did some preparation for this. They knew Bakugo would chase Ida and Kaminari would try Momo, so they made sure they would both be useless in this fight. That way now their opening strategy is done. How will each team react? You nodded and crossed your arms, watching as each team studied each other, waiting for the other side to take the first move. You talk as if it's a chess match, but you're not far off. Look at their faces. The pure aggregation and confusion on the faces of Bakugo and Kaminari was strange. They really hadn't expected to be batted back the way they just were. Their eyes were tracing every possible move to be made, like they were staring at a chessboard. "Nari, you good?" Katsuki growled over his shoulder and Kaminari nodded back, his hand flexing with static crackling around it. "Yeah, I'm back to full juice, let's fry them." You saw Ada's face fall a little. Maybe he didn't expect Kaminari to bounce back so quickly. Were his thrusters still on cooldown? The thought seemed to cross your mind at the same time that it crossed Bakugo's, and he smirked. "Go for Ada," he commanded over his shoulder as he charged forward towards Momo. Her eyes widened as she threw away the cloak and tried to pull something from her side, but Bakugo hit first with a powerful blast, sending her on her ass and out cold. Kaminari ran for Ida, who tried to avoid but ended up getting caught by the ankle, and it was over. The field exploded with electricity as Bakugo wrapped himself in the cloak, and the two had won the fight. Your mouth and eyes were wide open at the pure display of power from the two alphas, who walked away triumphantly while the teachers rushed to check on Ida and Momo. "They went all out," you muttered, and Shoto hummed beside you, his eyes focused on Izuku now as the field was prepped for your battle. "Stay focused now, remember our plan and code words, and we can beat them." You shook your head clear of shock and looked up at him with a determined grin. "Right, let's kick some ass." You both made your way to the field, passing by the victors of the last match who had their eyes locked on you, but you held your focus on the upcoming match, even though your Omega was clawing at you from the inside out to appease them. At least she was becoming more manageable after that awful heat. Kaminari's stare held curiosity while Bakugo's held flames that you didn't even acknowledge them. Hadn't you seen them absolutely kick ass? He wanted to see you kick some ass too, but at the same time a small part of him wanted you to be weak, to fawn over his strength and flee to his side at the slightest hint of danger. The alpha inside of him wanted you weak so that you'd need him. He shook his head to clear the possessive alpha thoughts and crossed his arms as he watched you closely. At least either way this fight went, some part of him would be happy, he guessed. Izuku and Ochako limbered up on their side of the field while you and Shoto stood deadly still, meditating and going over the plan in your heads. It was almost as if you'd made a faint telepathic connection during your practice. Your breathing was in perfect sync as you looked up at the same time and nodded to each other. Code words, remember your code words, why? And you reminded yourself, taking a deep breath. You could fight alongside an alpha and beat some betas without breaking a sweat. This was in the bag. Clean fight now. Go, All Might shouted. It had begun. Slipstream, just as you had practiced. Shoto sent out a stream of ice that you ran through, flipping into your wolf form and aiming for Izuku. Your job was to distract him while Shoto made sure Ochako was incapacitated. To her immediate shock, a giant ball of ice rapidly swallowed her, putting her out of action while you taunted and snapped at Izuku, keeping your fangs clear of his aimed kicks while she punched at the ice uselessly. Seeing that you were doing fine for the moment, Shoto worked on thickening the ice trapping Ochako so that Izuku couldn't easily free her and smirked at you. Great job, now helter-skelter. He called out and you snuffed in acknowledgement, lunging to snag your jaws around one of Izuku's kicks as it swung at you. It hurt but nothing was broken and your teeth clamped down hard as you twisted your head back, feeling ice grow beneath your paws swiftly, shoving you high into the air on a giant pillar. Once you gained a good enough height, you threw your head around and let go to throw Midoriya off the edge, giving time for Shoto to use his flames to send a tornado of fire. Your strange tactics had seemed to throw off the green-haired boy as he took time in the air to recover and spin, using a flick of his fingers to blow away the flames. It was still 2v1 you could do this. Dogma, Shoto yelled out, focusing on trying to trap Midoriya now, needing you to try your hardest to keep him occupied. You shifted half back to human, your ears and tail still present along with your wolf feet for extra grip on the ice and fangs for weapons. You used your hybrid form to rush in and swipe and bite the falling Izuku, keeping him focused on you while Shoto strategically covered parts of the terrain in ice, setting up for all possible contingencies and preparing to strike the second Izuku was in the perfect position. This was going great. You were flying and running and fighting just like the old days. It was as if you'd managed to shove your Omega into a little box and keep her tucked away. And you missed the way it felt not to have her in control. You grinned as you kicked Midoriya through an ice pillar and you both landed, you in front of him and Shoto getting ready to strike from behind. However, Shoto was the least of Midoriya's concern as he stared at the ice prison wrapped around Ochako, desperate to break her free. Before Shoto could move, Izuku used his black whip to wrap around you and throw you hard in Shoto's direction, causing you to smack into him and knock you both down with pain grunts. Shoto's arms wrapped protectively around you on impact, shielding and breaking your landing, but that left you laying on top of the half and half alpha. Ugh, come on, we can't let him free her. You tried to get back up but his arms around you stalled and you fell back onto his chest for another second, looking down at him in confusion and panic while his inner alpha flashed in his eyes. Oh no. A low growl rumbled his chest and your eyes widened in slight fear, the box containing your Omega starting to open. As Shoto, come on, snap out of it, we need to fight, you stammered, trying your best to push away from him as a low pathetic whine came from your throat. Shit. Among the spectators, Bakugo's teeth bared beside Kaminari as he watched you struggle to get away from the alpha holding you to him. That icy bastard, he began to growl, feeling Kaminari grip his shoulder and shake his head firmly at his friend. FRK off and let me. He stopped as he saw the same wild look in Kaminari's eyes that was very likely in his own as Kaminari's whole body trembled slightly. He had locked his muscles to prevent himself from doing exactly what Bakugo wanted to do, shaking from the pure effort of standing still, holding his breath. An alpha was wrapped around an Omega 100 yards from them and they just had to stand back and let the teachers step in if anything escalated. To Kaminari's relief, Shoto seemed to shake his head and look over to where Izuku had reached the ice dome, his fight mode clicking back in his head. Keep it together, Katsuki, look. He let her go. Bakugo roughly turned his head to see Shoto drop his arms and you scampered back to your feet, looking around to see that Midoriya had shattered Uraraka's ice prison, giving her plenty of sharp ammo that she ran around touching during your distraction. 2v2 again. They ran for you both side by side. Midoriya laser focused on Shoto while Uraraka ran with her hand out to you, flanked by her menacing floating ice shards. Shit, if she tagged you then you'd be out. You dodged, ducked and flipped to avoid her hands, transforming back into a wolf to be more agile and attempt to snap at her to fight back somehow, needing to jump over and evade the ice shards she was throwing at you with her zoned-out murder face freaking you out. She was always terrifying in battle mode. You could hear the godlike battle between Izuku and Shoto as fire and ice covered the battlefield and Izuku merely kicked and punched through the obstacles, aiming to knock Shoto out or pin him with black whip. You heard a hit connect and saw Shoto go flying from the corner of your eye, distracting you for just a second. That second was all Uraraka needed as she landed a hit on your muzzle whisker, ever so slightly. But it was enough. FRK. You were rising rapidly in the air with nothing to grab hold of. Shit. You saw the ice shard speedily raise above you, preparing to drop over you in midair. Shoto, help. You screamed in your head, too scared to make the transformation back to human and call out. But as if he had heard you, his head lifted. Why, in Green Hill, he shouted, and you took a moment to understand before grinning through your wolfy muzzle. He raised his arm to unleash ice your way and you twisted to turn yourself upside down in midair as the ice made a giant looping track that you landed on the underside of, the ice shards dropping harmlessly on the top side and shattering. Didn't think we'd use this move. Your claws dug in as you ran along the loop, righting yourself as you headed for Uraraka, using the momentum and speed to aim at her. Her eyes widened in shock at your recovery, and she released her quirk on you a moment before your jaws wrapped around her head. With one twist, you threw her body to the ice track and she collided headfirst, knocking her out. Yes, sorry Uraraka, but this fight had to be mine. You would apologize later for being so rough, but you had to focus on Izuku now and help Shoto. You looked around in time to see an unconscious Shoto in the hold of Izuku's black whip and froze. No way could you beat him on your own. Izuku's green eyes landed on you and you whined ever so slightly in the back of your throat, a fear that wasn't from your inner Omega flicking inside you. Real fear. Draw. While what? All Might stepped forward with a proud grin on his face, stopping any further attacks. One member of each team is unable to continue. The fight ends in a draw. An exhausted and relieved sigh left your lips as you collapsed onto your butt and transformed back to human, hearing Izuku come over to shake your hand and help you stand up. Good match, YN. You let him help you and smiled with a nod. I'm glad it was called a draw, though I don't think my quirk stands much of a chance on its own against your abilities. Oh. Achako. You quickly spun on your heel and rushed for your friend as Present Mike helped her to her feet as All Might checked on Shoto. Achako, are you okay? She groaned slightly as she rubbed her head but gave a thumbs up. Thanks for not going easy on me, she said with all honesty, coming closer to give you a fist bump. Same to you nearly had me though. A one-on-one with you would have ended differently. You grinned back at her, meeting her fist with your own. Battle evaluations will be on your desks first thing Monday morning. For now, go get some well-earned rest and enjoy your weekend, All Might called out, bringing the school day to its end. YN. You barely had time to look around before you felt a body crash into you, wrapping a pair of pink arms tightly around you. You both rocked, completely stole the show from the boys. I'm so proud of you both. Nina grinned, pulling Achako into the hug too. I agree, they both did a great job. Shoto smiled as he walked past, leaving the field to go change without saying another word, seeming a little bruised in his body and ego, let alone his alpha slip. What made him stop? Did he just redirect that possessive energy into winning the fight? Maybe that's why he looked so low. Well, after all of that, I think we need to do some group bonding again. Party anyone? Momo smiled as she and Ida joined the gathering group of students. Hell yeah, Kirishima yelled as he dragged Kaminari and Bakugo behind him. We're in. Kaminari smiled and Bakugo sneered. Hell no, I don't need to bond with any of you extras. His eyes flicked to you for a moment and his mouth went dry before he looked away. TCH. Well, it seems most people are up for it. I'll ask Aizawa if we could maybe go to that new club around the corner tonight, as we're all of drinking age now, might have to have an escort. But I can't imagine it would be too much hassle. We haven't even had a villain target us in quite a while, she continued, muttering away to Ida as they planned. Heading back inside to change. You rolled your eyes and went to follow the others, and when that horrible feeling of being watched prickled the hairs on the back of your neck again, looking around, you saw nothing but still. Loud excited chatter from the other girls about what they were going to wear snapped you out of it, and you held back an audible groan. A party in a nightclub sounded like a great idea for you. No thanks, it's not a good idea, you muttered as Mina pouted on your bed across the room, several dresses strewn beside her that she had bought to your room for you both to try on. Come on. You'll have your big alpha sister to keep you safe. Come have fun. You had made up your mind to not attend the club with the class tonight. Not only were you bruised and tired from your battle, you didn't want to expose yourself to the public. One class full of alphas was trouble enough, let alone unpredictable strangers. Drinking would be out of the question to prevent any incident, and you didn't dance. It was simply too much risk for no reward. Mina whined again as you shook your head, and she reached out to grab you by your hands, pulling you to sit beside her. You really don't want to go? You gave a small smile and shook your head again, seeing her deflate with a little bit of guilt. I really don't anyway. I think I'll enjoy having the dorms to myself for a little while. You gave her hands a squeeze. Well, I guess wanna come hang downstairs for a little bit before we all go? She pushed and you shrugged, inclining your head towards your pillow. I might just stick around up here and get a nap before I make some food. I'm really tired after all that training. You eyed a bruise that peeked out from your upper arm from Izuku's black whip. The bruise itself actually wrapped around your chest and opposite arm too, but your clothes hid it well and you didn't want to upset Izuku for putting up a great fight. Mina sighed in exasperation and threw her arms up. Well, fine. I'm so sad I don't get to see you in a cute dress, but sure, have your nap. You'll see us all hungover in the morning. She winked and gave your cheek a quick peck as she had always done before the summer, proving to you both that your second genders weren't going to get in the way of your old friendship, even though you did feel your cheek heating up a little and Mina's mouth watered ever so slightly. But you both shrugged it off. Once you were mated, she'd never have those reactions ever again, and you two could be best flirty friends for life. With a wave, she carried her dresses out and closed your door behind her, leaving you on your own at last. A content smile relaxed your face and you fell backwards into your pillows and closed your eyes, still reveling in your victory even if it was a draw. It was deadly silent in the dorms when your eyes fluttered open to the sound of your stomach growling. You peered over at the clock that only read 10 p.m. and HMM'd before stretching out and swinging your legs out of bed. It would be quite a while before anyone came back. May as well go eat now and get back to sleep before they all came home noisy and drunk. Wearing your comfiest sweatpants and a black thin vest top, you sauntered down the hall and stairs to the kitchen, not hearing a single sound but your own footsteps. It was kinda eerie but nice at the same time. Almost like you were walking in your own bubble universe as you shuffled through the kitchen and opened a few cupboards to prepare your meal. A small radio sat on the corner of the main island counter and your fingers hesitated before you switched it on. At first, a couple of radio presenters were babbling about some celebrity gossip that you didn't care about, so you wiggled the frequency, going from fuzzy channel to fuzzy channel before a crystal clear pop rock song caught your attention. You shrugged and smiled at the beat, not knowing a single lyric as you bobbed your head and went back to your meal prep, chopping some veggies to go with your flavored noodle cup. You half danced around the island to fill up the kettle and get the water boiling, enjoying the new song a little too much, but hey, you were alone. They always say you should dance like no one's watching, and what better time when you know no one is? You tossed the chopped greens into a pan and turned on the heat with some oil. Your hips swayed as you sidestepped to grab some salt, doing a little spin on your way back to the pan to sprinkle some in and giggled at yourself for being so goofy. As you waited for the water, you kept an eye on the pan, stirring occasionally with your foot tapping and your hips waggling to the song, not quite realizing the first had ended and it was an entirely new song by the time you turned to grab the noodle packet from the main island, almost jumping out of your skin with a scream when you did. Geez, I think I liked your awful dancing better, Bakugo grumbled, rubbing his ear slightly with a wince at your reaction to seeing him casually sat at the island. How long have you been there? You gasped, clutching at your heart as drips of adrenaline faded slowly from your chest, your whole body flushed with fight or flight and deep embarrassment. You slammed the power button on the radio, thrusting you back into silence. You caught a glimpse of a smirk from him as he shrugged, long enough to know you're not too bad when you dance. What the hell are you making at this time of night? You flushed, looking back to your pan and quickly turning off the heat when you could see the vegetables sizzling a little too much. Dinner, I had a nap so now I'm hungry, you pouted, raising your brow at him as you came back over to open your noodle cup before pointing an accusing finger his way, making him scowl. Why are you still here? Didn't you go out with the others? He HMM'd and shrugged, getting up to take the cup from your hands with a disgruntled hey from you as he filled it with hot water and stirred your pan. Didn't want to go get pawed up by some drunk hags again. Being an alpha draws that kind of attention. You rolled your eyes at his reply, simply watching as he stole your meal, knowing it would be pointless to complain or fight for it back. Besides, your upper body was still bruised and sore to move too much. Being handsome draws that kind of attention. It's got nothing to do with you being an alpha, heck, a beta that looks like you would do just fine at a club. He turned curiously to you, leaning backwards on the counter with his head peeped slightly. You think I'm handsome? Aw, fuck a doodle. Well, I'd be lying if I said you weren't, you sighed, trying to bring the topic to an end as you tried to think of what to make to eat now that your meal had been commandeered by the rude alpha. You watched with a pout as he tipped the cup into a bowl and laid the veggies on top delicately, making them look so damn good. A soft whine vibrated your chest and you sighed, about to stand up to rummage through the shelves again, but the steaming bowl was placed in front of you. A what? You twisted to look up at Bakugo with wide blinking eyes, but he just got himself a glass of water and sat down one chair away from you as if to leave a safe distance between you both. Eat up and stop gawking or I'll take it back, he growled, more in annoyance than anger, and you quickly dropped your gaze to look down at the simple yet delicious looking meal. Such a small thing like putting into a bowl and taking care in its presentation made it look so much more appetizing. Thank you, you said quietly before taking your chopsticks and lifting a good mouthful to your lips, blowing before eating. A very happy MMMH came from your nose and a smug, prideful grin flashed on Bakugo's face for a fraction of a moment as if he had just received the greatest praise in the world. His inner alpha was practically wagging its tail in pure happiness at being able to please the omega in front of him. He had to admit, rolling with these protective instincts was much nicer than suppressing them all the time. He couldn't rip his eyes away from you as you happily ate, the silence comfortable. This wasn't so bad. Was this the fluffier side of having an omega? The prideful side that didn't have him slobbering like a teenager at a strip club? He frowned slightly as he watched you, trying to put his finger on the way he felt right now. It was protective, but not in the way he had felt before. There wasn't a rival to fight off or anyone threatening you to make him defensive, but a protective urge was still lingering. No, protective was the wrong word. Caring, doting. The words made him want to gag, but that's how he felt watching you eat what he had prepared. There wasn't a rival, just your basic needs that he was managing. The alpha instinct to care for an omega and provide love and compassion was all new for the blonde alpha. As he simply observed you in pure bliss, he felt his BLD pressure drop, the need to shout and be angry fading away piece by piece as he let himself slip into this comfortable bubble with you like slipping into a hot bath. Even under his obvious stare, your inner omega was blissed out too, her instincts telling you that you were never more safe and cared for than in this little moment right now with one of the most brash and violent alphas you knew. It was heavenly. You both sat in the silence, giving yourself fully to the instincts of your second genders, just you two in the entire world doing what you were meant to do as an alpha and omega. Care and be cared for. When you finished your food, he gently took the bowl to clean it and put it away, cleaning up the rest of what you had used to start making your food before taking the seat right next to you, pushing his self-control to a new height as you stared up at him in shocked awe. Thanks for the food and everything else, you said softly, your whole being feeling like it was pulling you to him, to his lips in particular. He simply shrugged to say you're welcome, feeling himself leaning closer too. A kiss wasn't going to harm him. It didn't mean he had to mate you and make you his omega for life, even though the thought excited and saddened him in a bittersweet realization. Just a kiss. His fingers reached out to softly graze the bruise around your upper arm from Blackwood, snapping your attention away from his eyes to laser focus on the direct skin-to-skin contact he was delicately giving. He traced the ugly purple line, gliding over it where it lined below your collarbone and leaving a trail of excited goosebumps in his gentle wake. That Deku bastard, he grumbled lowly, a feeling of failure swamping him that his sober mind knew he couldn't have done anything about. He could have partnered up with you maybe. He could have been by your side in the fight to protect you and keep bruises like this from littering your beautiful skin. His thoughts came to a crashing halt as your fingers met his, loosely twining with them to move them away from your marks. His eyes flashed up to lock with your soft gaze. Occupational hazard of being a hero, right? You smiled and he felt himself deflate a little. Right, you were going to be a hero. You'd be putting yourself in much higher risks than a friendly spar with classmates day after day in the working world. He tensed up a little at the idea of you being in daily danger, his fingers twitching to hold your hand a little tighter, sweat building in his palms as a defensive response to the panic he momentarily felt. Back you go. Your quiet voice drew his full attention back to your face and you smiled nervously. He could hear the way your heartbeat picked up in your chest and swallowed, his own battering at his ribcage in a new sensation. I want to kiss you. His eyes widened at your confession, seeing a flush across your cheeks but confidence in your eyes that searched his own for a sign that he wanted to kiss you too. His words didn't want to come out of his mouth. In fact, they didn't even want to form a coherent sentence in his head at all. His brain was shutting off as his inner alpha boldly took the reins of control from him. His mouth opened and the alpha spoke for him, making your omega shudder in excitement. Then come here. Was this really happening? Your heart was slamming in your chest as his warm breath fanned deliciously across your lips, making your eyes flutter closed. You hadn't quite realized how badly you had wanted this until it was right in front of you, how your entire being was leaning into this boy, this destined protector. Of course he was the one, of course your omega had chosen him. It was like the world made sense now. He was so different and special from the other alphas, but more than that, he was gentle with you and only you. Not to mention handsome as hell. No one else saw this side of him. It was new and exciting. Your lips were only ever so slightly brushing each other's. Only a slight shift forward would give you both your first proper kiss. Slam. A sailor went to see what he could see. Both of you jumped out of your skin and twisted in your chairs at the loud and sudden singing that came through the kitchen, seeing an irritated Kaminari dragging in a very, very drunk Kirishima, who was singing at the top of his lungs, causing you and Bakugo to wince, quickly moving away from each other. Well, that's certainly a mood killer right there. You glanced up at Katsuki, who looked indifferent, watching in annoyance as his closest friends ruined his moment with you. Well, the moment was gone. What else could you do? Had too much to drink, Kiri. You sighed, standing up to help Kaminari guide him to a chair, choosing to be helpful over angry. It wasn't their intention to spoil anything, and you knew you had no right to be anything less than kind. Keep him from falling. I'll get a plastic cup of water. You felt the way Bakugo's eyes followed you as you walked across the kitchen, leaning over the side to reach up and grab a cup from the shelves, swallowing a little at the way your body arched up, forcing himself to look away and glare as he noticed Kaminari's eyes on you too. Why did he go to see? Kirishima slurred, and you couldn't help but giggle as Kaminari groaned, not quite appreciating how adorable drunk Kirishima was. But Bakugo smirked as Kirishima's nonsense seemed to break Kaminari's focus on you, and he settled down a little bit to enjoy his friend embarrassing himself. For the 100th time, I don't know dude, just SHHH. Well, why? And gets you some water. His little red spiky head popped up at your name and he smiled widely as if he had reached some great epiphany, only looking more adorable as his big eyes locked on you. Oh, why? And I have something super important to tell you. He did a sudden dramatic and suspicious scowl at Kaminari before leaning in your direction to stage whisper, "But es secret." You had to bite your lip to keep from bursting with laughter as you nodded your head and came over to him with his water. Bakugo almost growled out loud when Kiri grabbed your shoulder and cupped his hand around your ear. You, however, rolled with the drunken and goofy behavior and looked at Katsuki with a smile to let him know it was all okay, hoping he would indulge his best friend. You saw his scowl soften as you smiled, just a little bit. Katsuki has been having very naughty dreams about you. Your smile vanished. I hear him moaning your name every night. A flabbergasted expression of mortification had plastered itself across your face, making Kaminari blink in confusion at what could have possibly hit you so hard. OMG, OMG, oh my god. You didn't need to know that. Katsuki caught the way your eyes swiftly moved to look away, unable to even look at him, making his insides churn nervously. You flushed bright pink, patting Kirishima on the shoulder and putting the cup of water in his hands, feeling ridiculously self-conscious and awkward. Well, thanks for that. I need to go back to bed now. Night, guys. Kaminari and Katsuki shared a concerned look before the electric blonde literally dumped the duty of looking after Kiri on Bakugo, much to his anger as he wrestled to keep his best friend from falling over. What the hell did you tell her? You heard him roar as you took off upstairs, trying to cool down your face. It really wasn't something you needed to know. Hey, why, and hold on. What did he say to you? You made it halfway through the upstairs hall when Kaminari all but cornered you. Your face was still bright red as you turned to him, feigning innocence badly. Oh, hey there, Denki, fancy running into you here. Were you calling me? I didn't hear you. Cut the crap. Why? And what the hell did he tell you to make you act like this? You were smiling barely a minute ago and now you're this. He gestured to your nervous fidgeting and you sighed. It's embarrassing, not for me. For someone else, well, me too, but the other person would be horrified that I knew. Knew what? He pressed, crossing his arms. You stubbornly shook your head, looking for an escape as you shifted from foot to foot. Kaminari took a step closer and you froze up a little, his electric eyes narrowed suspiciously. Was it something about me? Your mouth dropped open and you shook your head. No, of course not. Why would he have said anything about you? You paused as you saw a flash of discomfort in his face. What would he have even told me about you that would have freaked me out this much for you to think it was you? Now it was his time to blush. Akami, look, he came forward another step. There's no point in beating around the bush here. I told Kiri something earlier tonight and I was worried he told you and I'd rather it came from my own mouth. A look of utter bewilderment took over your face as he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, struggling for the right words. Well, it was about you and how I know it might just be the hole. He started and stopped a lot before closing his eyes. Maybe I could just show you. You were so lost. What the heck was he blabbering about? This wasn't the Kaminari you knew. The overconfident goof who said whatever fell into his head without thinking this was new. Show me what? You asked softly, your curiosity bothering you, your whole body shifting uncomfortably under the electric blonde alpha's presence. God damn it, inner Omega, chill yourself. Why? And he took another step closer, his chest almost touching yours, making your eyes widen in slow realization. Oh, Kaminari, I don't think you've got the right MMMPHH. Your eyes had never been wider in your life. Not when you had stubbed your toe that one extremely painful time. Not when you had been accepted into UA and not even when you had found out you were an Omega. Nope. Currently your eyes were as wide as they could possibly be, looking into the equally wide eyes of a shocked Kaminari whose lips were puckered and pressed to the back of a rather large hand. Your own mouth was covered by the palm of that same large hand that had managed to dive in between you both the moment before Kaminari could land his lips on you. The fuck you doing, dunce face? The owner of the hand growled out lowly, almost calm. At his words, Kaminari seemed to snap back into reality and pulled back from you, rubbing his lips furiously and spitting a little. Damn, Bakugo, I got nitro in my mouth. Sweaty ass, he grumbled, turning to scowl at the taller blonde who had his red eyes narrowed on him while keeping his hand around your mouth as you merely blinked. Did you leave poor Kiri on his own? He grumbled again, looking around for the drunk redhead who was nowhere to be seen or heard. He passed out on the sofa. Now tell me, what the fuck do you think you're doing to my Omega? His Omega. A delightful chill ran up your spine and your breathing hitched, taking an accidental deep inhale of his skin against your lips, making your mouth water at the scent. Not to mention he was radiating protective alpha waves that was slowly soaking your panties. Yours? Kaminari started to laugh, but as he looked at what must have been a very blissed out expression on your face, he frowned. She doesn't smell like she's been mated. Both you and Bakugo seemed to tense at his words, snapping you out of your scent-wrapped haze enough to gently pry his hand off of you. Well, no, we haven't mated, you said shyly, immediately gaining the narrowed eyes of both alphas, which made you yelp slightly at their intensity. Doesn't matter, she's mine come her next heat, Bakugo stated to his friend bluntly, his eyes never leaving your own as you squirmed, stunned by the boldness of his claim on you, your panties getting damper by the second. Geez, inner Omega, chill, I'm gonna end up dripping on the floor at this rate. Kaminari crossed his arms as he stared at you, a small smirk pulling at his lips. MMHM, why don't we have a game of it then, Bakugo? See who she likes better by the time her next heat rolls up. A game. A goddamn game. You began to scowl, looking to Bakugo to tell him off for you. He'd claimed you in all but body. He wasn't gonna stand for such insolite. Deal. Bakugo. His name jumped from your throat laced in insult, but he only shrugged. I've got nothing to prove to this second-rate alpha, I just wanna rub it in when you come crawling to me begging. A flush plastered your face once again. But this time it was not one of embarrassment, this time it was pure rage, and you couldn't stop the words from jumping up and out of your throat in bitterness. So you're turning me into a game, playing with my instincts to toy with each other. TCH, you barged past them, barely making them sway as you stormed off towards your room. You can both go fuck yourselves. Why, and no, you spat over your shoulder as you wrapped your arms around yourself and marched to your door, opening it and slamming it hard behind you, knowing only Kiri, Kaminari, and Bakugo were in the dorms to hear it. FRK them, FRK them, FRK them. You locked your door and flopped angrily onto your bed, pulling the covers tight around you and snarling, your wolf ears and tail flicking, having popped up from your anger the minute you slammed the door. FRK them, you huffed and turned to face the wall, balling up your hands against it as you glared at them. No more. All right, Inner Omega. No more of this bullshit. I don't care if you think he's the one. You wrinkled your nose at your earlier dreamy thoughts, disgusted by them now. He's a goddamn asshole. I'm gonna find me a nice guy. Yeah, some nice beta maybe to start dating, and you can shut the fuck up and deal with it. Ugh, how could you have been pulled in so quickly? Your Omega was running her own games on you while you were just trying to get along with her. You huffed again and wrapped yourself up tighter, making a vow to avoid those two blonde assholes for the foreseeable future. Neither of them deserved you after that little stunt. And you made that very clear to your Inner Omega. From now on, you called the shots. But in the back of your head, you could practically hear your Inner Omega sing, "We'll see." God damn it. Bakugo snarled as he paced his room the next morning. Seeing that you had snuck out early to go away for the day with Cheeks, he didn't even have your phone number to contact you, and Mina was too out cold to ask her for it. Not that he wanted to explain anything to the loud pink girl. The fewer people involved, the better. Most of the UA dorm was full of hungover students in bed apart from himself and Kaminari, who were in the middle of a huge fight via text in their Baka squad group. It had started as petty comments and passive aggression. But as always with Bakugo, it escalated to real aggression. Dun's face. Don't get fired up on me. You're the one who agreed. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. Fuck you, asshole. Shitty hair. Yo, I woke up with a massive headache and a chat full of abuse. What's going on? KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. You asshole. Shitty hair. Me. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. Yes, you. You told her something last night and Dunceface had to chase after he tried to kiss her. Shitty hair. Oh, what did I say? Dunce face. I don't know. I thought you'd told her about my crush on her. Shitty hair. And you kissed her. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. He tried. The Omega stealing ass. Dunce face. She's not yours. She made that very clear last night. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. Thanks to you. Dunce face. Nah man, that was all you treated her like a game and she reacted. Shitty hair. Bakubro did what? Man, you can't do that. I know you both like her, but it sounds like you just made her feel like a toy. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. TCH, whatever. Shitty hair. Don't whatever me. Sounds like you both need to apologize. KINGEXPLOSIONMURDER. Like hell. Dunce face. I didn't do anything wrong. We lost her, dude. Move on. She's just an Omega. There's hundreds out there somewhere. I just wanted to try my luck with her cause she's cute. Bakugo nearly snapped his phone in half as he read the last text, choosing to throw it hard into his pillows instead. He didn't want any other Omega. He didn't want hundreds of other Omegas. He wanted you. He'd made up his damn mind, and now he couldn't get you out of his head. He hadn't lost you, because he doesn't lose. End of story. He had to fix this, but he wasn't about to apologize for saying what he did. It was an alpha thing and a competitive Bakugo thing, and you'd hear that kind of smack talk thousands of times with him. What would be the use of apologies when he knew he'd do it over and over? He almost never said sorry, and if he did say it, then he really meant it. He'd make sure whatever he did he wouldn't do again. This wasn't something he could simply apologize for. His phone buzzed with another message, but he didn't want to look at it. He simply batted the phone to the floor and fell backwards on his bed, a hand raised to pinch the bridge of his nose in agitation. You'd come around right. Your heat would seal that deal, and you'd already proved to be susceptible to his scent in particular. No, stop. He had to at least try to stop thinking that way. Oh, this is cute. Achako beamed as she pointed in the store window of a bakery at a tower of pink macarons. Her eyes were absolutely glued on them, and you chuckled as you held her wrist and pulled her inside as she squeaked. I can't afford it. Why? And she whispered, but you ignored her and went up to the older lady sat behind the counter. Good morning. How can I help? Good morning. May I have 4 of those pink macarons, please? You felt Achako tug at your arm, her eyes filling with guilt as you passed over the money and took the small box from the lady, but you shushed her and shoved a macaron into her hand the minute you left the bakery. Just shush and enjoy it, my treat, okay? After all, I did phone you and drag you out of bed really early, so take it as a thank you. She sighed and nodded, puffing her cheeks before lifting the treat to her lips to take a bite, happiness filling her face as she smiled and munched. So are we gonna talk about why you wanted to get out of the dorms so early this morning? You shook your head as you busied your mouth with your own macaron. It still infuriated you, and you simply wanted to have a nice day out without letting those two dumb blonde alphas ruin it. You couldn't hide from them forever, but one whole day to cool off and forget about how your heart broke as you cried all night was something you desperately needed. You hadn't even really slept, in all honesty. You'd been too mad and then too sad to let your brain switch off. The moment it read 6:30 a.m. on your phone, you text Ochako and was so happy to see her reply almost instant. She hadn't been out for too long and hadn't drunk anything but cranberry juice all night, so she was ready for a day in the bright sunlight, unlike Mina, who had apparently been dancing on the tables all night. So here you both were, wandering around a small town district not far from the local mall, just enjoying the blue sky. So how have things been since her heat? She asked, unable to cap her curiosity. You shrugged and smiled, swallowing your bite. Weird, the pheromones haven't been affecting me or others as much since I had that injection. I have to go through a few more heats before they can put me on suppressants again. But they said it should be much more manageable, so I'm not too worried. I see. She nodded along, seeming to think about something before shaking it from her head, so you continued to fill the silence. Yeah, it's all so new. I didn't know how little self-control I'd end up having. You paused and shivered. There was that feeling again. That horrible feeling of being watched. Your eyes scanned around you, making Ochako nervous as she copied your actions. What is it? Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just like every other time you had felt this unease of someone watching you, but it was so much more invasive this time. There was a few civilians walking around going about their day with nothing sinister about their behavior, so you know it wasn't them. Oh, you heard Ochako squeak and you spun around to look at her, following her amazed gaze to a small white fox that had settled on a nearby fire escape with its striking blue eyes watching you. Kaminari winced as he sent his reply, wishing he could take it back or delete it, but it had been seen by the other two males already. He didn't mean it. You weren't one of 100 other Omegas out there. You were cute and badass and going to be a great hero, one of a kind. Before you'd shown as an Omega, you were a kick-ass rescue hero in training that had caught his eye from your first year with how determined and strong you were. But of course, Kaminari being Kaminari, any and all flirting was immediately disregarded as a character trait. So now that you were an Omega and Bakugo seemed suddenly interested in you, he felt conflicted and a little jealous. He only likes you for being an Omega, right? Between the two of them, you did seem to gravitate to Bakugo. But this was all so early for you. It must just be your Omega bending to him. Was it too late for Kaminari to have a chance? Kirishima popped up in the chat as Kaminari was starting at his own message, snapping him out of his head. REDBOI. Sure, now man up. Both of you, and take her seriously already. It's painful to see you two act like knuckleheads all the time. A good 15 minutes went by before another message pinged. SPIKEYBOOMBOI. Who are you calling a knucklehead? That's a fox, you said dumbly as you stared, frozen in place as the creature's bright blue eyes seemed to hold you in place, unable to move a muscle as it studied you. Foxes weren't overly rare, but to see one in the middle of the day in a public place. You don't see many around here, not a white one anyway, Ochako whispered, as if scared that any louder might frighten it off as you both stood in awe at the beautiful creature. With a bewitching call, the white fox slowly stood up, gracefully stretching its back in an arch and revealing 9 flowing tails before it leapt up the fire escape and disappeared to the rooftops. Your mouth hung open. 9 tails. A damn 9-tailed fox. Before Ochako could close her own dropped jaw, you transformed into your wolf and bolted after it, your curiosity brimming. Had this thing been watching you all those other times? Why? No, wait. Why? She tried to catch you and activate her quirk, but you had already darted from her reach, clambering awkwardly up the fire escape to look around the roof. A flash of white caught your eye and you ran for it, leaping between buildings to try catch up with its darting actions, turning so fluidly, its 9 tails taunting you, beckoning you to follow until it slipped around a corner and disappeared. You panted as you came to a halt, looking around and sniffing, trying to locate where it could have vanished off to, your nose high in the air. A faint smell made your nose twitch and you followed its trail back to the streets, jumping down a fire escape and landing right on top of someone. Gah, the fox. Your wolf form had pinned someone and you quickly transformed back, your human weight now straddling a purple-haired boy with large bags under his eyes. Caught you. Wait, you don't smell like that fox. And he most certainly didn't look like the fox in any way, even if he was a shapeshifter like you. The gap in appearance was too large. Your own body and eyes matched your wolf shape, so it didn't make sense that piercing blue eyes would turn to soft lavender. Your head lifted as your nose twitched in the air desperately, but you were not able to find the scent anymore. Damn it. You looked down to the bewildered yet sleepy boy's lavender eyes and pouted, getting off of him carefully, feeling guilty for pouncing on him. You must have looked like a wild thing, having pinned him and been sniffing the air like a BLD hound, not to mention the small growl of annoyance that left your lips before you acknowledged him once again. You shuffled off of him to stand up and reached out a hand to offer help. I'm sorry, my bad. The boy accepted your help and stood up and brushing himself off with a lazy smirk as he slowly seemed to recognize you. You're UAS Omega student, aren't you? The wolf girl. You frowned as he smiled victoriously and sniffed at him, not smelling any indication of an alpha. You're a beta, right? He nodded, almost proudly, and crossed his arms. It's YN, right? You narrowed your eyes suspiciously at him and he laughed, a light and lazy sound that oddly put you at ease without any hormonal influence. You'd almost forgotten what that felt like. You must have looked far away as he cleared his throat to bring you back. Oh yeah, I'm and again, I'm sorry for jumping on you like that. You were chasing a fox, right? That's what you said anyway, that I wasn't the fox. Your lips pressed into a straight line and you took your time before nodding. Yeah, it was just sitting there watching me, and when it ran I bolted after it lost it when I bumped into you. So you got all flustered over a fox. He tilted his head, his tone one of curiosity rather than one of disbelief. It was a ninetails, you muttered, and his mouth pressed closed, studying your face and seeing nothing but the truth. You think it was someone with a transformation quirk messing with you? You took a moment before nodding. Maybe it makes more sense than any other explanation, right? I've felt those eyes on me before. Someone is either playing a really elaborate prank or I'm being stalked by a legendary fox. You chuckled at how dumb it all sounded. Who cared if he thought you were crazy? At least Ochako definitely saw it too. Speaking of, don't run off like that. What if it had been a trap? Oh, hello Shinzo. Ochako panted as she came to a stop next to you. Having run after you on the streets while you took to the rooftops, her face turned to a pleasant smile as she acknowledged Shinzo with a friendly wave of her hand. You know this purple dude? You pointed at him as you asked her, an eyebrow raised as you saw Shinzo put a hand over his heart dramatically. I'm wounded. You guys really don't care much for Class B, do you? Your eyes narrowed as you went through the list of Class B students in your head, not recalling the sleepy-looking boy, looking to Ochako with a lost expression. Don't you remember? First year sports festival. This guy almost made Izuku walk out of the ring. He transferred into Class B last year from the general studies classes. You rubbed your neck in shame as you gave a small shrug. My bad. Weight made Izuku walk out of the ring. Oh, the memory smacked into your brain as you smiled widely, making Shinzo lean back a little, unsure of the sudden emotional switch you just made. You're the mind control guy. Why can't I remember you from Class B? He smiled again, a lazy and crooked shape that made you want to smile with him. I'm on work studies a lot still. I'm glad you finally remember my sports festival debut. Well, now I have two things to apologize for. You sighed, looking away with embarrassment. It's fine. Honestly, it was nice being pinned and straddled anyway. He winked and Ochako nearly squealed beside you as you raised a brow. You're a sub. That makes sense. You smirked in victory as you saw him blush faintly, Ochako's quiet squeaks getting longer. But for forgetting me. That is gonna cost you. He stroked an imaginary beard as he thought, and you held back your giggle before responding. So it's a financial kink too. Want me to be your sugar mommy and buy you some lunch as an apology? Ochako finally spluttered, grabbing your arm and shaking you a little. You can't say things like that to strangers. You and Shinzo burst into laughter and chuckles respectively, and Ochako pouted. It's fine, really, he reassured her, turning back to you with another easy and soft smile, his lavender eyes soothing you. Maybe we can talk some more about that fox. I love a good conspiracy theory, even more so when they have solid proof. Ochako looked at Shinzo before back at you. You told him about the fox. You nodded and she looked to Shinzo, crossing her arms. Did you see it too? He half pouted and shrugged, seeming a little bummed out as he shook his head. No. I wish I had, but you and can tell me all about it, right? I've just gotta go help out with a delivery and I'll meet you guys for lunch. Shall I give my number so we can organize? Well, smooth. You half smirked as you pulled out your phone and opened the contacts list, pressing new contact and handing it to him. I'll text you and you'll have mine. You watched as he put his number in, saving himself as purple sub, which made you snort and almost cackle. I'll save yours as sugar mommy dom. He chuckled as he turned and waved. Text me a location and time to meet you too. Will do. You and Ochako waved him off before turning to head back to the town. What was that? She practically sang as she watched you smile at your phone and put it away. That, my friend, was the healthiest conversation I've had with a boy since I became an Omega. And that didn't say much for your social interactions lately with the opposite sex, but he was nice.